Hey, give me a few seconds to get this thing locked into place. I bought my daughter this phone holder so she could take pictures, because she's such a talented photographer, but she never uses it. So today we're using it. I was working with another Myers online. I'm a Myers myself, and Junior has a live stream that he was firing up, but his software he used to do his live stream crashed out on him. Let me send him a message so he knows we're going. Hope you guys can't hear my dogs barking in the background, but you probably can. Alright, hopefully Junior can see this. Alright, well, this is not a well researched on my behalf, because I didn't realize I'd need to lead a Torah study today, but I promise you I've been through the Torah cycle 7 times so far, so I know at least a little about what's being said in it. I have an app on my phone that I like to use with a Hebrew calendar on it. It's called the Hebrew Calendar widget in the Google Play Store, and it is kind enough to keep me up to date on all the Torah portions and the half Torah portions. Should I have like music in the background? I guess it doesn't matter. I'll just talk incessantly. Alright. Okay, good. JR can see. Excellent. Alright, well, let's look up what the Torah portion for today is. Of course, it's going to be Exodus 6, but I'll give you an exact call out on that. If anybody knows, they can just feel free to send it to me. There we go, Exodus 6. Got 6:2 to 9:35. A little background on the Torah portions. The reading of the Torah portions runs back to the Babylonian captivity. In fact, most biblical scholars say the Torah wasn't even compiled until the Babylonian captivity. Hey, Arnie. Some of them even say that Deuteronomy actually predates the rest of the Torah, because when you read in the Torah, you see, if you read in the Kings, the Chronicles of Kings, Deuteronomy wasn't even located until the time of King Josiah. He was the boy king. I believe he was 8 years old when he was inaugurated. Probably not the kid you want running things, but he was raised by the high priest, and they kept him safe from his grandmother. Was it Athanathia? Alathia? It's Jezebel's daughter. But she's bad news, I believe. That's the order of things. But he is the king who actually found the book of Deuteronomy in the temple. It says we found this scroll or this book in the temple. And the good thing about Josiah, in terms of him literally living up to what the word truth means, is that he took the cover off. That's in Greek, the word truth means to hide nothing. I think it's alatria, I think. But it means to cover nothing, because in Greek, when you stick an A at the front of a word, it negates the meaning of the word. So the word is the opposite of hiding, is what truth is in the Greek. And one of the big problems with a lot of religions is that they like to hide things from the believers. The Catholic Church had a long tradition of this. In fact, unfortunately, they're going back to it, because they began doing the Catholic liturgy in Latin again, which, of course, Latin is a dead language that no one even knows, unless, of course, you're a Catholic priest. or I guess maybe a Roman legal scholar. But that's an example of someone keeping things hidden from the people. Josiah, when they found Deuteronomy, he said, take this book and you read it out loud every 7 years to all the people gathered. So every sabbatical year, every Shemitah year, he ensured that the people, whether they were literate or not, would know what the Torah said. And, congratulations and a big thumbs up to King Josiah on that one. He's one of the kings who is known as a righteous king, and there was only three. There was Josiah, David, and Hezekiah. That's it. Everybody else is bad news as far as it goes. He looked up the word. If only I could read Greek. Okay, we need a transliteration. And then I could maybe say that one out loud. But yeah, Josiah, good guy. Young, foolish in some ways. Got himself killed. Aletheia. There we go. I thought it was something like that. Josiah got himself killed by the Egyptian army because when Egypt was going to battle Assyria, Josiah got in the way, and the Pharaoh sent him a message and said, why in the world are you preventing me from doing what God told me to do? And of course then that begs the question, well, wait a second, is he talking about Jehovah, the God of the Israelites, or is he talking about one of the Egyptian gods? Is he talking about, they had many gods, so why would he refer directly to one God and told him to do something, to go and defend Israel from Assyria? And some say it's because the Ark of the Covenant had ended up in the possession of Egypt, because the Levites during the reign of King Manasseh had to keep it away from him to keep him from destroying it, because King Manasseh, that's Hezekiah's firstborn son, the one that was, he didn't sire that child until he had his 11 extra years. His 11 extra years of life that he basically, Isaiah came to him and Isaiah said, all right, listen, man, get your affairs in order. I know you don't have a son, but you need to find somebody to rule this kingdom, because you're going to die. And that's God's judgment. And unfortunately, Hezekiah didn't just say, well, whatever he wills is what I will. He said, he turned and said, he faced the wall, and he quietly prayed to himself, haven't I done everything for you? Haven't I done all these things? And then Isaiah said, you just got 11 more years. And unfortunately, in those 11 years, he sired Manasseh, who was one of the most vicious kings that ever lived. It was Manasseh who, by the oral tradition, had Isaiah the prophet sawed in half. Said they put him inside of a log and had him sawed in half. Obviously, he did not think that Isaiah was a legitimate prophet. But Yeshua did, because he read from his scroll. So, all right, well, let's get into this Torah reading. We're in Exodus 6. This Torah portion is called Vaiera, and I'm probably mispronouncing that, but I could read a little primer on it, because we got a primer in the My Jewish Learning, and I'm so thankful that we live today in the age of the internet, because literally everything's at your fingertips. There's no excuses anymore. I think it was Paul said, man will be without excuse. Well, yeah. Well, you don't have a smartphone? Are you the one person left that doesn't have a computer? I worked on a computer 3 weeks ago at a 99-year-old man's house. 99-year-old man. This is a man who was in the 3rd Infantry, he chased Rommel across the desert in World War II. He helped invade Italy. He helped invade Germany, and he liberated Dachau. I was helping a 99-year-old man who liberated Dachau. And I know there's Holocaust deniers out there. I'm certainly not one of them. But and I asked him, I said, what was it like? He said it was the most terrifying and terrible thing he'd ever seen in his entire life. He said it changed his whole life when he saw it. And if you've ever been to the Holocaust Museum, General Eisenhower, who later became President Eisenhower, he made sure, there's a quote on the side of it that said, let the world never forget that this happened. He's like, don't you ever try to convince yourself that people didn't do something this terrible. And unfortunately, since we're talking about God and His kingdom, I mean, it's Him that allowed it. It's Him that did it. And I hate to say it, but lots of times the Jews are like the whipping boy. Judgment starts in the house of God, and he can be very heavy-handed. But in the same token, now you've got to understand that during the time of World War II, in the nation of, well, it wasn't really a nation, but in the territory called Palestine, it was relatively peaceful. There was some natural Arab-Jew friction, but there was no real warfare or anything like that took place. So it was actually a relatively peaceful place, considering how much turmoil the rest of the world was in. And sometimes I think it's because the people who, when the call went out in 1917 to return, the people who returned to the land received some protection they didn't receive in other places. But anyways, that's a whole other story. So here we are, Vaiera. It's from the Hebrew word, and I appeared. It's the first word spoken in the parashah that begins in Exodus chapter 6, verse 3. It's the 14th weekly Torah portion in the annual Jewish cycle of Torah readings in the second book of Exodus. It consists from Exodus 6:2 to 9:35. The parashah tells of the first 7 plagues in Egypt, and it's made up of 6,701 Hebrew words. To add a little brief synopsis, usually when the Jews read things, they have a ritual for everything. I have no doubt the Orthodox community has everything divided in specific ways. They usually break it up into 7 different readings. And when you say the different readings in a synagogue, it's a privilege and an honor to get to come and read from the Torah, because first and foremost it shows that you know the holy language, which in itself is a great gift. I wish I did. That's why when Yeshua got up and he read from the scroll of Isaiah, I mean, I half think the reason they let him get up there and read is because they were trying to show people he didn't even know Hebrew, is what I really think they were probably trying to do. And he went up there and read it to him and said, and today this is fulfilled in your viewing. So I have to read a lot of those things in the scripture, and particularly at Christ's time, and I think a lot of times the Jews are just, well, I shouldn't say the Jews, the Pharisees, the leaders, people who lived their lives in a very kosher way, and I'm definitely not insulting that, but these are people who lived their lives, they were called the set-apart ones. That's where the word Pharisee comes from. It literally means the set-apart ones. They basically had accepted that since the Babylonian captivity, the priesthood had collapsed, and there wasn't much left of what the righteousness of Israel was supposed to be. So they themselves became the righteousness. They wanted to be the royal priesthood. I mean, you understand, when Peter says royal priesthood, all he's saying is what was said at Sinai. He's not saying something new. In fact, it'll probably be next week's Torah portion, in the next 2 weeks, you'll literally hear God say to the people, you are a royal priesthood. That's what he wanted from the beginning. The Pharisees, after the Maccabean revolt as well, they realized that the Aaronic priesthood had fallen. The Sadducees, who were Hellenistic and they're bent anyways, were running the temple. So for the most part, the Pharisees considered themselves to be the real holy people in Israel. They had given up on, well, I mean, they didn't give up on the system of the Sanhedrin, but they were sure a part of it. They had given up on the idea of the holiness of certain temple activities, because they weren't being done properly, per se. And they had made the synagogue the place of learning and of worship, which is from the Babylonian tradition. In fact, the famous Rabbi Hillel actually lived in Babylon. He was a Babylonian rabbi. He didn't even live in Jerusalem. He was Babylonian. His grandson Gamaliel is who trained Paul, and he was actually in Jerusalem. But he was a very famous rabbi, and you'll see most of the time Yeshua tends to agree with the rulings of Hillel, but definitely not on the idea of a what is called as a divorcement by proclamation. And this is still practiced by the Muslims today. You know, you may have heard that in some Muslim countries, a man could just say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and that's it. The girl's out on her head. She's on her own. Unfortunately, that was being, in a certain sense, taught among the Jews, that you did not have to have a writ of divorcement. And if you read real close in Matthew and in Mark, where this is being debated, you'll see that there's no, in one place it says there's a grammaton, which is a written document. Another place it just says, we give them a divorce. And the issue there, legally speaking, is, can you divorce without a written divorcement? No, of course you cannot divorce without a written divorcement. If you do so, you cause that woman to commit adultery, because that's the law. If you do not have a legal statement of divorce, then if you or that woman go about marrying somebody else, you've committed adultery. I mean, that's basic law. And unfortunately, there was a practice among the Jews at the time of putting their wives out, which is probably why Yeshua was said to have spent his time in the presence of prostitutes. Because let's face it, if you're a woman, you're not going to go to work at Burger King in Israel. You're not going to get a welfare check. You're going to end up a prostitute. You're going to have to find a man to take care of you. But anyways, if you, that's why it says if Moses would allow us to have a writ of divorcement, what do you say? I mean, obviously, the goal is to not have divorces. I mean, that's why Yeshua said he allowed it, because your hearts were hard. And I mean, hey, you know, sometimes people are hard-hearted. Sometimes people do divorce. I'm not hating on them. I've been divorced myself. Now, don't get me wrong, I got married when I was 20 to a girl that was 19, and it lasted about 6 months, and we definitely were not godly people at the time. I've been married to my wife that I have currently for now 12 years, and it's been hard, but every year gets better, and every day I become a better man than I was the day before because of her. And I understand that's why God gave us wives, to make us better men. If you recall, Paul said, women stay silent. And I'm defending Paul. This is one of those things where where women will say, ugh, Paul, God, such a sexist and a bigot, or a bigamist. He says women need to stay silent in the church. That's ridiculous. Well, it's not. It's not ridiculous. Two big reasons why it's not ridiculous. Number one, a man and a woman who are not married should not argue. Argument is a very intimate thing. A fight, particularly in public, is a very intimate thing. You should not fight with women who are not your spouse. And you shouldn't fight with your spouse, but you best not fight with anyone who's not your spouse in public, because my gosh, that makes you look like a fool. That's a superficial reason. The deeper and more spiritual reason is because he says women should keep quiet in the church. Take their questions to their husbands. There's a reason. Because if a woman who is married takes her question to a husband who loves her and cares about her, he will take the time to answer her questions. And if he doesn't answer her questions, then he's not doing his job as the priest of that household. So basically, if a woman will take her questions to her husband, it allows her husband to become twice the scholar of the Torah that he would have been on his own. Because a man's only going to be interested in certain things. His woman is going to allow him to be interested in more than what he was interested in before. I've talked to my wife about things in the Torah I thought were pretty straightforward, and she's given me a whole different take on subjects, and I just never thought of it that way. And it's a left brain, I guess you'd say a left brain, right brain, combination. It's the two that were separate coming back together, and that's a whole other thing in the Jews, that they think that, man and woman was split apart and they come back together and become the one thing. Which, hey, maybe so. I would say that you become one flesh physically when you have children, because you have two different DNA codes and they become one code. You've created a new entity built of the two of you, and that is your children. Of course, a reason to take good care of them. All right, well, let's get into the Torah reading. Sorry if I was jumping off on all the subjects coming into my head. So let's start with Exodus 6. And I like to use the blueletterbible.com for research, because it has a lot of linked media that'll help you. Of course, you got your standard lexicons, Strong's Concordance, that type of stuff. Absolutely, that's there. But you've got some other Holman's Bible Study. You've got just lots of biblical resources that you probably didn't even know existed. I mean, there's a particular teacher I listen to sometimes on YouTube, a guy up in Hendersonville, Tennessee, and he is always talking about McClintock and Strong, McClintock and Strong, McClintock and Strong. It's about a 14-volume Bible study set that goes, I mean, it's deep. It goes deep. It's actually on his channel that I learned about Alfred Edersheim, which is Alfred Edersheim was born an Orthodox Jew, and his family converted when he was about 8 years old to the Anglican Church. But he was raised still learning the Talmud, and he learned a lot about the Hebrew culture of his family, etc., etc. And he ended up writing several definitive works on Judaism at the time of Christ. He wrote a book called, and I've two of them I've read, and they're awesome. I mean, they're written in the 1880s, and they're great. The Temple and its Ministries and Services, which is, it'll just change your whole perspective on what was going on at the temple at the time. I mean, in some ways, it was like Disney World. I mean, you'd show up at the temple, you didn't bring sacrifice, you brought money, because, you was going to buy the sacrifice from the priesthood, because they made sure you had a sacrifice that was clean. They'd have rigs set up to dump out thousands of gallons of blood in a day, wash the whole thing clean, and it'd be clean in just a few minutes. So it had water piped in and ready to cleanse the whole altar area. It was like, for instance, it says, when you make a donation, don't sound a trumpet. Well, when you find out why he said that, it's because the donation pots were in the shapes of trumpets, and if you dumped a bunch of money in, it would make a lot of noise, and everyone would know you were putting in a lot of money. And that's why he said, when you donate, do it in secret where nobody knows, because they had a separate room set apart for donating in private, and that money was used for the poor, I believe, was the money that was put into that particular donation spot. So it's a great book. Like I said, Alfred Edersheim, The Temple and Its Ministries and Services. He had a great book that'll explain to you the whole concept of what the Pharisees said about Samaria. It's a book called Sketches of Jewish Social Life. Also, great book. Both those are easy reads. I'm working on the life and times of Jesus Christ the Messiah, but that thing reads like stereo instructions. It is dense. I mean, it's 3/4 of the page is his written, and the bottom fourth of the page is cited notations, and that's every page. And it's an 800-page long scholarly work about the time period and what was going on in the life of Yeshua, and it's a lot to read. I mean, he's every other statement he's quoting from the Talmud, every other statement he's quoting from the Septuagint, from the Targum, from all the works at the time. Let me turn off my notifications on this phone, so we aren't getting any noises in the background. Okay, Exodus 6. Sorry to drag it on. All right, Exodus 6. I'll just start with 6:1. And then Yehovah said to Moshe, now shalt you see what I will do to Pharaoh, for with a strong hand shall he let them go, and with a strong hand shall he drive them out of his land. I'm reading from the King James. And God spoke unto Moshe, and said unto him, I am Yehovah, and I appeared unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, and by the name of Elohim Almighty, and by the name of Yehovah was it known to them. And interestingly enough, in the King James, Exodus 6:3, it says Jehovah. It doesn't even say Lord there. They actually wrote Jehovah there. Exodus 6:4. And I have also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their pilgrimage, wherein they were strangers. And I have also heard the groaning of the children of Israel, whom the Egyptians keep in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Wherefore now say unto the children of Israel, I am Jehovah, and I will bring you out from under the burden of the Egyptians, and I will rid you out of their bondage, and I will redeem you with outstretched arm, and with great judgments. And I will take you to me for a people, and I will be to you an Elohim, and you will know that I am Jehovah your Elohim, which brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you into the land concerning the which I did swear to give unto Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you for a heritage. I am Jehovah. And Moshe spoke unto the children of Israel, but they did not hear Moses for the anguish of spirit and for the cruel bondage. And Jehovah spoke unto Moshe, saying, Go in, speak unto Pharaoh the king of Egypt, and let the children of Israel go out of his land. And Moshe spake unto Jehovah, saying, Behold, the children of Israel have not hearkened unto me. How then shall Pharaoh hear me, who am of uncircumcised lips? And Jehovah spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, and gave them a charge unto the children of Israel, and to the king of Egypt, to bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. These be the heads of the fathers of those houses, the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel: Hanok, Palu, Hezron, Carmi. These are the families of Reuben. And of the sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Yamin, Ohad, Yachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of the Canaanitish woman. These are the families of Simeon. And these are the names of the sons of Levi, according to their generations: Gershon, Kohath, Merari. And the years of the life of Levi were 137 years. The sons of Gershon, Libni, and Shimei, according to their families. And the sons of Kohath, Amram, and Izran, Hebron, and Uzziel. And the years of the life of Kohath were 130 years. And the sons of Merari, and Mahali, and Mushi. These are the families of Levi according to their generations. And Amram took him Jochebed, his father's sister, to wife, and she bare him Aaron and Moses. And the years of life of Amram were 137 years. And the sons of Izhar, and Kohar, and Nepheg, and Zichri, and the sons of Uzziel, Mishael, Elzaphan, and Zithri. And Aaron took him Elisheba, daughter of Anamadab, sister of Nahshon, to wife, and she bare him Nadab, and Abihu, and Eleazar, and Ithamar. And the sons of Kohar, Asar, Elakin, Abisaph. These are the families of the Korhites. And Eleazar, Aaron's son, took him one of the daughters of Putiel to wife, and she bare him Phinehas. These are the heads of the fathers of the Levites according to their families. These are that Aharon and Moshe, and to whom Jehovah said, Bring out the children of Israel from the land of Egypt according to their armies. These are they which spake to Pharaoh king of Egypt, to bring the children of Israel from Egypt. These are Moshe and Aharon. And it came to pass on that day that when Jehovah spake unto Moshe in the land of Egypt, that Jehovah spake unto Moshe, saying, I am Jehovah. Speak you unto the king of Egypt all that I have said to you. And Moses said before Jehovah, Behold, I am of uncircumcised lips. How shall Pharaoh hearken to me? Now you saw several big actors get mentioned in there separately. Phinehas, he's the one who speared through the Israelite man and the Midianite woman through the... Are there any children watching? Through the genitals. And if if you dispute that, that's fine. But just look in your Strong's Concordance; it's in there. I think the word is pudding. It's phallus, is what it says. But basically insinuating that what they were doing was sexual sin, and he was putting it into it right there in front of everybody. you see the four sons of Aaron, two of whom will be destroyed for bringing strange fire, is the phrase, and the other two who apparently are going to be the good boys. And it's in that area that we find out that the priests are no longer allowed to drink alcohol. Apparently it was cool before, but not anymore. You don't need to mess with wine before you go and try to deal with Yehovah. Interesting word. Why would Moses refer to himself as having uncircumcised lips? Like twice. Twice he said he doesn't have circumcised lips. I'm looking up the arel is the Hebrew word. I'm looking it up right now to see. JR, you got any pearls from the Torah you want to drop on us while I'm looking up this word? My internet connection's slow because I got the stream going on it. And Lord knows how much internet's being used in my house right now. This is my man cave we're viewing this from. This is where I actually do my work and record my music and stuff like that. Let's see, a masculine noun. Uncircumcised. Projecting. Loose. Here we go. Uncircumcised as a metaphor. Slow or stammering of speech. One whose lips are closed as if they had the foreskin, and are therefore too long or too thick to utter efficiently. Your ear is closed with foreskin. Yeah, that's interesting. It looks here like he's literally saying, like, I got deformed lips. I can't even talk straight. How is he going to listen to me? And it is pretty much, I believe it's traditionally known that I think it actually says it when Yehovah is talking to Moses on the mountain. He's like, I can't talk. And he's like, Aaron will talk for you. You tell Aaron, Aaron will tell them. And it's interesting too because it's, if you recall, I think it's in Leviticus 12. There's it might be Numbers. I think maybe it's Numbers. But there's a controversy. Aaron and Miriam are giving Moses trouble because he's married to a black woman. I'm just saying. She black woman. She probably black. She probably blue-black. She's dark. She's Ethiopian. So, or Midian. I'm sorry, let me say Midianite, right? So, they say, no, you shouldn't be married to her. You know, that's not right. She's not one of us. And God comes down, calls Miriam and Aaron over to her, and basically says, look, I don't talk to Moses like I talk to you. I don't talk to Moses like I talk to a prophet. I don't come to him in a vision. I don't speak to him in a dream. He doesn't hear voices. You know, he's seeing me face to face. I'm talking to him, and the word says mouth to mouth when I speak to him. So it's interesting that he keeps referring to himself as having these uncircumcised lips when God's going to literally go mouth to mouth with the man of uncircumcised lips. Yeah, but rather one coined by Moses. Either way, this is when you say the coined by Moses, you're referring to the uncircumcised lips. JR, is that what you're referring to? That's what I'm sure that's probably it. But yeah, obviously he didn't feel like he could speak properly. Apparently he was embarrassed about it. But you don't have to be a great speaker when the God of creation is giving you something to do. You don't have to be the best workman in history to craft something worthy or speak on his behalf. He'll give you what you need. Yeah. All right, let's move on to, unless somebody's got something they want to talk about, I don't mind. It's Shabbat. I ain't doing nothing else today. I mean, I'm just going to sit at the house, drink coffee, and hang out with my family. That's pretty much it. Let's see. It's hard reading all these names, by the way. I'm sure that not only am I mispronouncing them, but that the English translit didn't transliterate them properly either. So, like if you listen to Jews, they don't say Simon, they say Simeon. And then if you, they don't say Levi, they say Levi. And you got words like Judah, which is not even a J sound in Hebrew. Yehuda would be the tribe of Judah. But, all right, moving on. Oh, yeah, wow. Oh, trust me. Yeah, they're wild. And the thing with the rabbis is they have a real... The rabbis are the modern day Pharisees, right? So they are the people who carry on the customs and the traditions established in the Babylonian synagogue. But they'll tell you it's not established at the Babylonian synagogue, but it's established at the 40 elders on the mountain with Moses. And this is called the Torah al-Peh, which is the oral Torah. That is the oral traditions passed down, teacher to student, rabbi to the Talmudim, because I mean, and you kind of gotta ask yourself, if everything is in the Torah, why would people even try to say, look, we know more things, we know things that aren't said? Well, honestly, if you look in the Torah and you read close, there's probably 100 different places where God has requirements for things that aren't clearly stated. Like, for instance, he says, when you slaughter an animal, do it in the way I told you. And you look in the Torah, you're like, I don't see a diagram on slaughtering in here. How am I supposed to do that? You said do it like the way you told you. And this is an instance where the rabbis would say, this is why you need us, because he did tell us. He told us at the 40 elders at Mount Sinai, and we are the ones who are carrying that knowledge. And for certain things, well, JR just said, well, they're like popes of their day. In a certain sense, yes. In a certain sense, no. I truly believe that the majority of what rabbis say, especially at the time, Yeshua probably didn't have a problem with, but he did have a problem with the things that directly contradict what the Torah states. For instance, him and his disciples are walking on the Sabbath, right? Which is already a dangerous act if you got Pharisees around, because they ain't gonna let you walk but so far. And they're plucking grain in the field with their hands. They're gleaning the field with their hands. Well, I don't know if gleaning is even the right word, but they're plucking grain and eating it. They're not harvesting it. They're not, grinding it up and baking bread. They're just eating grain that's in the field. It's like walking by I got grapevines in my yard. If I walk by a grapevine, eat grapes, I don't consider that work. And, well, neither does God. Because in the Torah it states that as long as you do not use an implement to harvest something, you're not violating the Sabbath. You can just eat off. I mean, look at the sabbatical year. Look at the year of the Jubilee. You're not even allowed to plant. You can't plant. You have to literally eat whatever's in the field that grows of its own. I mean, you just got to hope for the best on that one and hope that he has provided you with everything that you need. Well, Arnie, I know what you're talking about. That's another rabbinical tradition. This is the rabbinical story behind the reason that Moses' lips are damaged. All right, here's the tale. They say that when Pharaoh's daughter found him in the river and brought him in, immediately Pharaoh knew he was a Hebrew, probably because he was circumcised. And he's like, look, that's one of them Hebrew children. They're not to be trusted. They're a problem, and I'll prove it to you. And, of course, his daughter's like, oh, no, this is my baby now. I've got a child. And then he's like, look, I'll show you that the kid's bad. He said, take a diamond and set it on the floor. Big, nice, shiny diamond, set it on one end of the floor, and take a hot burning coal, sit on the other. He said, watch that Hebrew baby walk straight to that diamond and put it in his mouth, because they're greedy. And then he set the baby down, and then Moses went over to the hot coal and put the hot coal in his mouth and burned his mouth and burned his tongue and made it where he can't speak properly. But the tradition is that when he did that, not only did it symbolically show that he's a man of clean lips, but that to the Pharaoh it said, well, I guess I was wrong. He's your baby now, Which, considering that they were killing the Hebrew babies at the time, that in itself is a miracle. Just the fact that he allowed his daughter to keep a baby that I'm sure he knew wasn't an Egyptian when he saw it. But that's the rabbinical tradition, and that, trust me, they got all kind of stories. I don't know them all, not even a small percentage of it. In fact, if you ever watched Nehemiah Gordon talk, he said most people who teach the Talmud probably know about 20% of what's actually in the Talmud, because they focus on the things that are actually what furthers what they teach. Like, most pastors don't know the whole Bible, but they know the part of the Bible that they need to tell their congregation so that they can keep them coming in. They know the things that have applied to their life. A lot of people most people don't read the Torah portions like we're doing today. They started off with good motives and intentions because they did not want to break the Torah. And yes, that's true. And they set up boundaries so they would not violate. Yes, that is true. And honestly, I listen to a lot of Orthodox and rabbinic or Orthodox rabbis, and some ultra-Orthodox and Messianic rabbis too. And honestly, I would rather listen to an ultra-Orthodox rabbi talk about the Torah than I would Jim Staley. And it's not because Jim Staley went to jail. It's just because I get a lot more out of listening. It's the way I think about it is it's like sitting with Paul and listening to the Apostle Paul talk. You got to remember, Paul was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. I mean, he said it straight up. He's like, look, I'm Gamaliel's student. You heard of Hillel? His grandson taught me everything I know. He knew not simply what the Torah was. Obviously, he knew the Torah. But he also knew all the oral law associated with it, all the things that they were debating about how they should handle them. Because a lot of Hillel's proclamations, he really made, and I learned this again from the Orthodox rabbis, he made because he was trying to hold the Jewish people together in a time when not only was Hellenistic thought entering into the study of the Scripture and such, but a lot of time it's just, they were just falling away because, why be a Jew when you get a good contract, you get your good contracts working with the Romans. You get good paying jobs working with the Romans. Jerusalem was a poor place. And again, you can learn all this reading Jewish, Alfred Edersheim's sketches of Jewish social life. He talks about how Jerusalem, though it was the holy city, though it was the place where the Pharisees were like, if you're not from around here, you don't know what you're talking about. But most of the people were poor because Jerusalem was not on a major trade route. However, Galilee was rich. Galilee is where the Silk Road came through. Galilee is where the big trade routes and the Roman roads were running. That's where the big tax money was getting collected. That's where a lot of entrepreneurs and business people were. People up in Galilee were people who were being exposed to, they were exposed to Asians, to the Chinese. They were exposed to people from all around the world coming through those trade routes into the Middle East. Those people in Jerusalem were not exposed to the great multitude of ethnicities that were out there and available at the time. Most folks in Jerusalem stayed with Jews. It was mostly Judea, mostly Jews in Judea. Of course, there was a Roman contingent of soldiers, but that's just to keep that's for crowd control. That's because they got to keep an eye on these Jews because they tend to revolt every few years and, start a rebellion. In fact, if it wasn't for Rabbi Akiva, one of the famous rabbis, Rabbi Akiva, who they still talk about today, whose pronouncements on the Torah they still teach today, he is the one who pronounced Barkova, the Messiah. He's like, this guy's the Messiah. He's going to save us from Rome. And then the I'm having trouble saying it. The Bar Kokhba revolt began. And when that happened, the Romans were like, that's it. You're done. This is ending today. They massacred the Bar Kokhba revolt, crucified thousands of people, lined the roads with them so that everybody would know this is what happens when you try this. You're done. Your temple will be destroyed. We're breaking this thing at its root right here today. And that was because of a rabbi who wasn't even Israelite. Rabbi Akiva wasn't even an Israelite. He was a man from the outside. The Romans had bribed the leaders of Yeshua's time out of office. That's why Yochanan the Immerser was in the wilderness rather than following. I'm going to give you a whole different perspective on this. Okay. I actually don't think that the Romans bribed them. I think they paid bribes to the Romans to be. And that was a tradition that comes from the time of the Greeks. Now, let me tell you why I'm saying this. you gotta go back to the time of the Maccabean revolt. The Maccabean revolt was, and come Hanukkah time, I was debating with people about this. I was debating with them, should we even bother with Hanukkah? And they'll say, well, Yeshua was at Hanukkah. And I'm like, well, Yeshua was almost murdered at Hanukkah, and he told all the people there they weren't his sheep. So, anywho, so the Maccabean revolt, right? So the Greeks have taken over Israel, which, by the way, is exactly what Daniel told them would happen. Daniel said the one-horned he-goat, that's Alexander the Great, would come and break off the horns of the ruler at the time, that's the Medo-Persian Empire, and he would become for a short time, he would become king. But then 4 horns would take its place. And that, of course, is the 4 generals that were under Alexander the Great, who broke apart Alexander the Great's kingdom of Macedonia into 4 separate provinces. The Ptolemaic kings, actually, Ptolemy first took Israel and Egypt. The Seleucids had the eastern part, east side of Israel and north of it. But there was a little fight, and the Seleucids took over, got a hold of Israel, and pushed Ptolemy back into Egypt. Now, Ptolemy's Egypt was nicer to Jews than Antiochus's Israel was nice to Jews. Antiochus, you got to understand, Antiochus had an army that was made of, former Persians and such. And the Romans came to him and basically said, look, here's the deal. We're going to draw a line in the sand, and you need to decide today if you're going to be a friend of Rome or not. Antiochus said to the envoy, he's like, I need a few days to discuss with my generals. And while he was doing that, the senator from Rome took a stick and drew a circle around Antiochus and said, if you walk out of this circle without giving me an answer, it will be considered a declaration of war against Rome. So naturally, he did not do that. He did not declare war on Rome. Unfortunately, he took the army that he was going to meet the Roman envoy with down into Israel and started taking names and busting heads. And that's when they implemented, certain regulations. And by the way, these regulations are the same things in lots of times that are being brought in today. For instance, they forbid circumcision. Okay, Muslims today, in certain cultural backgrounds, circumcise women. They don't just circumcise men, they circumcise women. That's called female genital mutilation. And we would all say, oh, that's terrible, you shouldn't do that. But do you understand how the Greeks looked at this? They said, oh, you cutting a boy's penis when he's born? That's male genital mutilation of a child. You shouldn't do that. You should wait till they can decide if they want that to happen to them. Excuse me. So, the Greeks, in a certain sense, in a certain modern sense, because you got to remember, most of the modern world is based on the Greek ideas, said, no, you shouldn't do that. That doesn't make any sense. You shouldn't do that. They had laws, the Hebrews have laws on what you can eat and what you can't eat. The Jews like, that doesn't make any sense. What if you get trapped on an island and all you got to eat is crabs? You're going to have to eat crab or you're going to die. We just get rid of that because that's pointless. That's useless. That's your old superstitions. The problem is, of course, and you got to understand, and this is straight from rabbis, they did not forbid the Jews to learn the Torah. They were allowed to learn the Torah. They were not allowed to implement the Torah in their life. They were not allowed to have their own laws. You don't get to have, you have Greek law. You don't have your own law. Yes, JR, they did. There was what, but you got to understand that sacrifice that took place was not, and gosh, it goes back. All right. Take, for instance, all right, here we got to take it way back. Why would Antiochus decide that the temple in Israel was in fact a temple to Zeus, or to, actually, Jupiter Olympus is who he said that it was a temple to? Well, you have to follow you have to trace back the name Yahweh, because guess where Yahweh comes from? That is Jupiter, the ancient Latin word for Zeus. Jupiter, or Jupiter, Jupiter, because it comes from, there you hear Yah in there, don't you? And then Pater, which is an Egyptian god, who is, of course, isn't that what we say of God? I am the clay and you are the potter. You are the one who crafts me. So Antiochus is like, look, this is just a temple of Zeus, just call it what it is. And you got to understand, he can't make that kind of pronouncement without the backing of somebody. There were plenty of Jews in Israel who had no problem with the Hellenization of Israel. All right, you got to trace what was going on at the temple up to the time. Okay, when Antiochus is laying down all these rules, he's being backed by a lot of other Jews. Jason Oniad was the high priest of Israel at the time that this happened. Now, Jason is a legitimate Aaronic priest. He is the bloodline of Aaron. He is exactly who God has said was supposed to be running that temple. I ain't saying he didn't make bad decisions, but I'm saying he was who he was supposed to be. So Jason goes, yeah, you're right, Jerry. Yes, Jason was pretty Hellenized in the way. He didn't have a problem. Like, for instance, he had a gymnasium built, near the temple, like right across from the temple. And you got to understand, a gymnasium is where dudes get naked and go work out together. And that's pretty weird in the Hebrew mindset. So, and that ain't all the Greeks do when they get naked together, by the way. He had a gymnasium built. He was not, he was an Aaronic high priest, but he wasn't, fighting the Greek, but he was keeping the temple running. He was doing the things of the temple that were supposed to. He wasn't putting idols in the temple or anything like that. He was just kind of living in two worlds. He's like, look, I can be a good Hebrew high priest, and I can go work out at the gymnasium. It's all good, man. He was probably a really political guy. The problem is, he did not pay his bribe to Antiochus's officials on time. When he did not pay his bribe on time, another man who was a Levite, but not an Aaronic Levite, he wasn't of Aaron's line, paid that bribe and became high priest. At that point, Jason Oniad's like, well, we're out of here, because no, this ain't happening. So what Jason did was he took him and his priesthood down to Egypt and approached the Ptolemies and said, in the book of Isaiah, and this is Isaiah 19:9, let me double check that. Let me double check. Isaiah, I believe it's 19:19. Internet's a little slow. Give me a second. Yes, Isaiah 19:19. There will be an altar to Yehovah in the heart of Egypt. Okay, so you're like, wait, someone's going to build a temple in Egypt? Yes, and that's what Jason Oniad did. He went down into Egypt and he built the temple of Leonatopolis. And he started the temple. It's smaller than the one that was in Israel. But he started all of the sacrifices and all the oblations right there. He's like, look, I'm high priest. I'm going to follow this prophecy from Isaiah, and I'm building a new temple. And he did. And that temple ran from that point until after the temple in Israel was destroyed. If you were a Jew living in Alexandria, which is in western Egypt, you went to the temple of Leonatopolis to make your sacrifices. You sent your obligatory money that the Pharisees required you to pay, which is the 2 drachma tax, or the half shekel. You sent that to Israel, but you sent your sacrifices to Leonatopolis because it was convenient. It's the place to go. It's been that way for 200 years. Because Jason Oniad was a legitimate Aaronic high priest. The temple in Israel had no legitimate Aaronic high priest. This is a big part of why the Pharisees basically said, that temple ain't holy no more. We're holy. We are the temple of God. Oh, are you hearing your New Testament teachings? Because they're there in the Pharisees too. The Pharisees said the same things. They said, look, we have to live clean. We are the temple of the living God. We have to give the bulls of our lips as sacrifices. We have to give charity to the poor. We have to do these things because the temple is not what it used to be. Okay, and all that came from the Maccabean revolt. I'm not even sure how I got diverted onto that topic, but it's one I like to talk about because nobody knows about the Temple of Leontopolis, and I like to blow minds with that one. And you can look it up on, you can go online. It's mentioned in the Wikipedia, and it's also in myjewishlearning.com. They have a big article. In Alfred Edersheim's Temple and its Ministries, I believe, there is a little blurb in there about the Temple of Leontopolis. The people in Israel call the Temple at Leontopolis the Temple of Destruction. And they called he explained it saying that there's a Hebrew word for destruction that's like a jot or tittle different than the word for holiness. And they called the temple in Israel the holy one, and they called the one in Egypt the destroyed one, the one of the destroyer. So even though that's the one where the Aaronic high priest was. Anyways, there was a lot going on at the time. The more we dig up and find out, it's not as plain as the Hanukkah stories tell you. There was a Jewish civil war going on at the time of the Maccabees, and there were plenty of Jews killing other Jews. You got to remember, Judah Maccabee was killing Jews. It wasn't many Greeks. It was mostly Jews because he was fighting his own people, and it was Jews that got that sacrifice done. You got to understand. Hanukkah takes place on the 25th day of Kislev. Now, and people will be like, 25? You mean like December the 25th? Yeah, but not for those reasons. The Hebrew calendar is lunar, so it wobbles. It wobbles compared to solar calendar. See, people who like a solar calendar say, well, I don't want a 13-month-long year or a 12-month-long year. That's ridiculous. I got somewhere I got to be. I need to know when my birthday was. I need to know when my kid's birthday. I don't need a leap month. That's bad enough. I got to deal with a leap day. So when you look at the sun that way, so you set up a solar calendar, right? And I'm astronomy, exactly, darkest day of the whole year. Yes, it's the winter solstice. They set that up on the winter solstice. It just happened to be Kislev 25 that year. And by the way, last year, Christmas was Kislev 25, because sometimes they line up and sometimes they don't. It's my belief that the reason that the Hellenized Jews dedicated the temple on winter solstice is because they were dedicating it to the sun god. They were saying, oh, it's the rebirth of the sun god. We need to dedicate the temple at this time. Hanukkah actually didn't even receive the stamp of approval of the Jewish authorities until a year after the quote-unquote Hanukkah miracle. And remember, it's only in the Talmud that you even read about the 8 days of the oil burn. That's not even in the book of the Maccabees. Apparently that wasn't important to them. Or it's a story that's being told to help you see something spiritual. It was a year after that, Kislev 25, on the remembrance a year later, that a miracle occurred. And I don't even know what the miracle was because I can't find it. It must somewhere in the Talmud, I guess. But it stated that there was a miracle that happened in Israel, and that miracle validated the claim that people were doing at that time that they should keep Hanukkah as a remembrance. And at that point, Hanukkah became the 620th commandment. And this is among the Orthodox. That's the final commandment, by the way. Among the Orthodox, there's 613 listed in the Torah. There's 7 that were given by the elders as mitzvahs. And the 7th mitzvah is Hanukkah. It is considered the crown of the Torah because that miracle occurred. And I don't know what the miracle is. You can look it up. But there was a lot going on at that time with that civil war. And, different groups had different ways of looking at it. Like I said, the Pharisees were like, well, we just happened to beat the Greeks. It wasn't a big deal until a miracle occurred a year later, and they said, well, we need to make sure that this is remembered forever. And that's what they're doing. They're still remembering it today. In fact, the rabbis say that in the world to come, that's to say that after the resurrection has occurred, there will only really be 2 holidays left. That will be the holiday of Purim and of Hanukkah. And I don't necessarily know why, but that's what they say. Of course, we'll still be keeping Sabbath, and Isaiah says new moon festivals too, but they say we'll also be keeping Purim and Hanukkah because those things have to stay forever for whatever reason. All right, let's see, Pastor. Yeah, and I've seen that, JR. Even back when I was in, the Baptist church, got a little handout that said basically, Jesus was conceived at Passover and born on Christmas. Except now among the Messianics, he was conceived at Hanukkah and born on Sukkot, which I admit does sound a lot more correct, because if he's going to tabernacle together with his people, it's best to do it tabernacles. Oh, here's something interesting I picked up in the book of Matthew. I was watching Nehemiah Gordon talk about Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew, which is it's an anti-missionary work. Anti-missionary means that in Israel, like, you're not allowed to go and speak the gospel in Israel. That's forbidden by law. They have, I don't know if I should say the law. I don't think they're going to arrest you, but the Jews will run you out. Like, basically, if you go in, they have groups of people called anti-missionaries who infiltrate home churches, who, watch people who are talking on the sidewalk with Jews and stuff like that. It's almost like a secret. It's like a secret police. Well, hey, who knows about the Stasi like those former Russians, huh? All right. Who knows a good secret police like the former Soviet? A lot of the Jews used to live in the Soviet Union, from back in the day. I'm making a joke there. But, yeah, you'll catch a beat down. Exactly. Yeah, they'll run you out. They'll run you out of town. They'll tar and feather you if you go in there, speaking the gospel, especially if you're not Jewish. I mean, if you're a Jew, you might get away with it, and they'll just ostracize you and think you're dumb. But, yeah, you go up in there preaching that gospel, they'll tell you what they think about that. But they have anti-missionaries, and they have anti-missionary works, and the Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew is one of them. Even though it's an old Hebrew, some say the original, written by Matthew, was written in Hebrew, and they use it as an anti-missionary document to say, well, show me where in this Bible there's 14 generations between, Yeshua and, I think David. Show us where that is, because it says here's there's 13 in your Bible. It says 13 generations, but it says there's 14, but it only shows 13. But then they'll break out the Shem Tovs, and they'll actually, if you actually read it, it will actually show you that there's 14 generations and show you how that you can arrive at that total. But they don't use it that way. So, anyways, Nehemiah is talking about this Matthew, and I'm wondering, does it just straight up say he was born in a sukkah in the Matthew? And I don't know, because I don't have a copy of it, and he hasn't actually produced a line-by-line translation yet. And some of the other line-by-line translations of the Shem Tov, unfortunately, in italics, they'll instead of just directly translate what it says, they put in italics words from the Greek that they want it to say to make it make more sense in a gospel way. But I was looking at Matthew, even in, consider this. Even in the Greek Matthew, when it is it Matthew? No, is it Luke? Where does it actually say he was born in a manger? I think it was Luke. So it actually says that this word is like patime, which means a place for eating. Yes, that can be a stall where you'd feed an animal. But what do you do in a sukkah at Sukkot? What are you required to do in a sukkah? Oh, let me see. I'll find it, JR. If we're talking about the same thing, I'll find it. Hold on. pretty sure it was Luke that it's in, because that's the most detailed account. Let's see. Luke 1:26. Mary gave birth to Jesus, placed in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn. But it's not exactly say where Jesus was born. Okay. So Luke 1:26-27. Wrapped him in swaddling cloths. Let's see. In Luke 2. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger. That's verse 7. Chapter 2, verse 7. All right, well, that word manger is, I think, patamai, which means a place for eating. Oh, you're talking about the Hebrew Matthew. Oh, I don't think it says that Matthew was born in a manger. I'd have to go look at it again. But in Luke, in the Greek, it says patamai. Now, that word, you were looking at JR. Can you post that one? Can you look that up and post it real quick? Now, the thing that interested me was it said that it was a place for eating, like a stall for eating, is what it said. And interestingly, when you go to Sukkot, you build yourself a little stall house, basically. Got 3 walls and a see-through roof. And you must eat every meal in it. That's an interesting thing you have to do, eat your food in the sukkah. When you make a sukkah, you got to eat your food in the sukkah. Unfortunately, I did not do that as Sukkot this year. I also did not have a see-through roof. I'll get there. But I thought that was interesting that she wrapped him in by the way, swaddling clothes were priestly robes that had been recycled. Those are what those swaddling clothes were. And placed him in the place for eating, which sounds like a sukkah to me. I'm just some guy. You don't have to trust me. It'd be like reading Rainbow. You don't have to take my word for it. All right. Well, let's go and read Exodus 7. Well, let's read Exodus 7. All right, Exodus 7. And Yehovah said to Moshe, "See, I have made you a god to Pharaoh. Aaron, your brother, shall be your prophet." That's a big statement. He said he made him an Elohim to Pharaoh. "And you shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother shall speak unto Pharaoh, and he shall send the children of Israel out of his land. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh shall not hearken to you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt, and bring forth my armies and my people, the children of Egypt, and the land of Egypt by great judgments. And the Egyptians shall know that I am Yehovah when I stretch forth my hand unto Egypt and bring out the children of Israel from among them." And Moshe and Aaron did as Yehovah commanded them, so they did. And Moshe was 80 years old, that's 80. And Aaron 83 years old, that's 83. And they spake unto Pharaoh. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, saying, "When the Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, Show me a miracle, then shall you say unto Aaron, Take your rod, and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent." And Moshe and Aaron went unto Pharaoh, and they did so as Jehovah had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh, and before his servants, and it did become a serpent. And then the Pharaoh also called his wise men and sorcerers, the magicians of Egypt. And they also did take manner with their enchantments, and they cast down every man his rod, and it became a serpent. But Aharon's rod swallowed up their rods. And he hardened Pharaoh's heart, that he hearkened not unto them, as Jehovah had said. And Jehovah said to Moshe, "Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. Get you unto Pharaoh in the morning, before he goes out into the water, or as he goes out into the water. And you shall stand by the river bank against him, and the rod which is turned into a serpent shall take in your hand. And you shall say to him, Yehovah, Elohim of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, hereto he would not hear." Or I say, that is to say, even though previously you have not heard what I said. Thus says Jehovah, in this you shall know that I am Jehovah. Behold, I will smite this rod that is in my hand upon the waters which are the river, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that are in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loathe to drink the water of the river. And Jehovah spoke unto Moshe, and said unto Aaron, Take your rod, stretch out your hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon the streams and upon the rivers, and upon their ponds and upon their pools of water, that they may become blood, and that there may be blood throughout the land of Egypt, both in the vessels of wood and in the vessels of stone. And Moshe and Aaron did so, and Jehovah commanded. And he lifted up the rod and smote the waters that were in the river, and the sight of Pharaoh and the sight of his servants, and all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. And the fish that was in the river died, and the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink the water of the river, and there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. And the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, neither did he hearken unto them, as Jehovah had said. And Pharaoh turned and went into the house, and neither did he set his heart to this also. And all the Egyptians digged around the river for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. And 7 years were fulfilled, and 7 days were fulfilled after Jehovah had smitten the river. A baby lying in a manger. Is that word patme there where the angel said it? I'd look it up, but my internet's real slow. Baby lying in a manger is what I'm going to close. Yeah, 212. So baby, right here it is, 212. Yeah, I was going to actually say that too, JR, that I believe Edersheim also said that the shepherds they're referring to were the priestly shepherds who kept the priestly flocks that were to be used for sacrifices. And you might say, well, you only need sacrifices at Passover, so he must have been born at Passover. Well, no. The Tamid offering was a daily offering, and it costed 2 lambs a day. So you got one in the morning and one in the evening. In fact, there is a good argument to say that Yeshua may have been more of a Tamid offering than the Passover in a certain sense, because the Passover is really not a sin offering. It's offered by the head of the household. Now we might say that he's our Passover because he's the head of our household, and it's up to him to make that offering because it's not something we can do. We're not head of the household. And you remember that one lamb could cover multiple houses, especially at the time of the Second Temple, because there's a lot of people. I mean, you got 1 million plus people coming in to Jerusalem. Well, I'm wondering how the sewers were taking that one. I bet the Romans were like, you gonna bring that many people here, and y'all got plumbing this bad? I mean, come on. We'll see you later, Arnie. Thanks, man. Shabbat shalom. But yeah, I had wondered if the use of the word manger there had actually been a clue that he was talking about a sukkah, but that there's not really a word sukkah. There's the word tent. In fact, in the Septuagint, the word that is translated as "you shall live in a sukkah" is the word that is tent, which is, I can't remember, peiton or something like that, but it's a word that it literally means tent. So I don't know. And it's a hard thing about this Hebrew life being translated into Greek words, because sometimes, I mean, I'm trying to think of a Hebrew, or I'm trying to think of an English idiom, and I'll use the famous one. You know, well, when somebody dies, they kick the bucket. You know, oh, they kicked the bucket, man. And you're like, huh? You'd write that out, and somebody reads it, 1,000 years from now, and they're like, why do people keep kicking buckets? You're like, oh, because they're dying. You have to, but you have to infer that from the meaning of what the rest of it is that you're reading. Offering was done outside of the gate. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're not going to... Well, and you could ask yourself, too, I mean, could Yeshua and Judas be a reference to a scapegoat and the Azazel and the goat for Yehovah, or the offering for Yehovah, one inside and one outside? You know, I don't know, because it says that in Act, okay, it says Judas hanged himself, but it says in Acts that his guts spilled out onto the potter's field. And some people will say, well, that's odd. You know, why would you end up with your guts spilling out? I mean, I guess if you hang there a long time. Yeah, Barabbas. What about Barabbas? You got one that got set free. He was his name was Son of the Father. And the other one was the Son of the Father, you know. I don't know. There's lots of interesting parallels. Like I said, the big problem with having to get out of this Greek translation is we don't know what words from Greek would have been used to mean things for Hebrew people, because, I mean, Greek was like the third language. I mean, primarily people spoke Aramaic because that's the Babylonian tongue. You'd speak Greek if you were at a trade city, like, I mean, Galilee, I'm sure they spoke plenty of Greek because that's where people were trading all the time. Jerusalem, it would have been a lot more Aramaic. But in the synagogue, the word is read in Hebrew. I mean, if you didn't know Hebrew, you didn't know the holy language. At least, if nothing else, the Pharisees would consider you ignorant. They would consider you an ignorant country person. And the country people were unclean, and you weren't supposed to go hang out with the country people. I'm so ashamed of myself. I mean, I got a note on my phone that's been showing up it shows up every day for the last year. It says, if you will learn Hebrew, all doors will open for you. I just had that little bit of inspiration like a year ago. I said, I'm going to put that in my phone so I'll remember to do it. Yeah, I can go Aleph. Yeah. Aleph Bait. Dalet Gimel. You know, not much. And I can recognize some characters when I see them, and I can hear certain words when they're spoke, because you do end up hearing a lot of the same words said over and over again when people are discussing Scripture. Oh yeah, if you don't have a knowledge of Hebrew, it's going to be so. It's like for 7 years I've been reading this Torah in English, and it hasn't changed. Honestly, sometimes it does seem like it has changed. I mean, really, it's like I'll read something and I'll be like, is that what it said last time I read it? It seems like something was different, you know. But can you imagine reading it in Hebrew? It's like picking up a Rubik's Cube, and every letter, you can view it from this angle, this angle, this angle, this angle, this. And all those possible meanings are legitimate. And here we go back to the question of, you know, do we need the oral Torah, the Torah Alpeh? Do we need the oral Torah because certain things there's just no clear explanation for? Like, for instance, the word translated circumcised in Hebrew, it doesn't really mean cut off foreskin. It doesn't really have a clear meaning. They just understood it to mean removing the foreskin. The word for it's a coat. Yehovah says, bring choice fruit to the festival. And you'd be like, what kind of choice fruit? Well, it's got to be of the citrus variety. And you're like, well, can I bring a lemon? Can I bring an orange? Can I bring a tangerine? What can I bring? Well, the Hebrew scholars say, well, it means you bring an etrog. Even though I couldn't tell you how they figured that one out. Because it's not written that that's what you're supposed to bring, but traditionally it's understood that's what you bring. Because that fulfills what God wanted. And they say that's the kind of thing that came from the 40 elders at Sinai. Phone number. I don't know, should I say it out loud? I'm scared. Here, I'll send it to you privately. Hold on. Message me on Messenger, JR, and I'll send it to you. And we still got like 2 more chapters to go, and then the Haftorah. Oh, you have a Shabbat? Oh, I thought this was our Shabbat. Hey, I'm glad you got one to go to, man. I'm happy for you. I did have one, but I think it has stagnated in terms of what it can offer now. It's just like I said about reading this Torah in the English. It can only give you so much, and that's it. And beyond that, you have to take the next step of moving into the new language. All right, well, I'll go ahead and just keep reading it. I'll just keep going. I see my saxophone hanging in the back. It's shiny, looks like it's gold. So maybe somebody will stop and say, hey, this guy's got gold. But yeah, just message me. I'll send you my number. All right, so back to Exodus here. I can't help but notice that Yehovah seems to be making a point. He's like, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. He's like, he's not going to listen to you. I'm not going to let him listen to you. Just tell him what I said. Seems like it's a strange way to get things done, huh? Something else that's interesting here. It says in Exodus 7:4, it says, Pharaoh shall not listen to you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt and bring forth my armies. And you'd be like, oh, he must be talking about Israel. And then the next statement is, and my people, the children of Israel. Is it not the same thing? Why would he say, and my people, out of the children? Now, I personally think because you got to remember that it's not only people from Canaan who came out of Egypt. When the Egyptians left, when the Hebrew people left Egypt, it was a mixed multitude. That means there was Egyptians who said, we want to be with the God of Israel. You got to consider and when I try to think about what I'm reading, I try to put myself in the mindset of a person that lived, 3,800 years ago, 3,500 years ago. You're living in Egypt. You're taught there's lots of different gods, and all of them have a certain purview. There's a god of death, a god of life, a god of darkness, a god of light, a god of green things, a god of brown things. There's a god of sand, the god of the river, God between the mountains. That's, by the way, his name is Daju. He's the God between the mountains. And you can look that one up. That's a real Egyptian god, Daju, between the two mountains. You're taught that all these gods exist and they all have a part, right? So some people, when they read the 10 plagues, they say, well, God's making sure that Egypt knows that every one of these gods is nothing because it's just him. Well, yeah. I mean, I agree with that. But I think there might also be another side to that coin. Imagine you are a person who lives and breathes by the Nile River. You're a person who you eat by what the Nile gives you. You drink from the Nile. It's the source of life. And I mean, the Nile was the life of Egypt. It was desert on both sides and the Nile between. And that's why the Egyptians didn't worry much about getting invaded, because somebody'd have to go across the desert to get to them. So it took a while and a lot of organization of armies to actually get to them. So imagine you're a poor person. You get told by these temple priests that the god of the Nile is, all this powerful, life-giving God. Well, one day, and you don't know anything. Imagine you don't know nothing about Moses. You don't know nothing about Pharaoh. You just know he lives, way up north, which is downriver from you. Let's say he's 100 miles away. 100 miles down the Nile from you. So you have nothing to do with what happens at the Pharaoh's place, and you'll probably never see his castle because you're probably never going to. You got to remember, before there were cars, people didn't travel 100 miles to do things. They just stayed where they were. If you couldn't walk to it, you probably just didn't do it. So, anywho, and thank you, JR, by the way. That's a wonderful, incredible compliment. Thank you. You just stayed home, or at least stayed within, let's say a 10-mile radius. Like, have you ever watched The Lord of the Rings? When Samwise and Frodo are walking, Sam looks at the edge of a field and he says, "This is as far as I've ever gone from Hobbiton." And that's the way it was for most people. It's just you didn't travel that far because number one, you'd have to travel back. You had to take the resources with you. I mean, the roads had brigands, there were pirates, there were thieves. I mean, murderers are out there waiting to waylay people on the roadside. If you're going to travel, you had to do it in a caravan. You needed some protection if you were going to go. So anyways, so you're this person who lives 100 miles south of the Pharaoh. Don't know nothing about what's going on. There wasn't a live TV feed. Pharaoh wasn't live streaming the inside of his house all day. I mean, you couldn't go hop on Pharaoh News and watch what the Pharaoh's up to today. You just heard through the grapevine when things happen. But that river turned to blood. And you saw that happen. And you got to ask yourself, what is the God of the Nile doing? What is happening? Why is the God of the Nile doing this? And then you take it the next step when the next plagues come. We'll read about the next plagues. And each one of these, just try to consider, what would it have been like being a person who didn't know, you don't know who Moses is. You didn't know this was happening at Pharaoh's house. Moses is dealing with the man at the top. The people at the bottom are the ones that left. All right, let's move on. We'll go to Exodus 8 here. And we'll read more about these plagues. And again, when you're reading about them, try to put yourself in the position of a person living at that time. My internet connection's slow. Oh, hey, honey, I see you're watching. If you would, make sure your phone's not on the internet in the house. Make sure you're using your cellular signal to stream, because we don't have much internet. And using the upstream and uses most of it. For you guys that aren't computer techs, when you have a DSL connection, you basically have two pipes that both work at the same time. Your inlet and your outlet. You have an inlet coming in, say 6 megs, which is a nice big. It's like drinking out a fire hose. You can just great. But the upstream is like 1/12 that size. It'll give you a straw to actually put your stuff in. And when you're filling your straw up, the water coming out the fire hose stops. So if you're using 80% of your upstream, you only get 20% of your downstream. So we have to be careful when we're uploading to the internet. It eats up a lot of the functionality of what we got. So let's do Exodus 8. And Yehovah spoke to Moshe, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, Thus says Yehovah, let my people go that they may serve me. And if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all the borders with frogs. And the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into your house, and into your bedchamber, and unto your bed, and into the house of your servants, and unto your people, and into your ovens, and into your kneading troughs. And the frogs shall come up upon you, and upon your people, and upon your servants. And Yehovah spake to Moshe, saying to Aharon, Stretch forth your hand with your rod over the streams, and over the rivers, and over the ponds, and cause the frogs to come out upon the land of Egypt. And Aaron stretched his hand over the waters of Egypt, and frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. And the magicians did so with their enchantments, and they brought forth frogs in the land of Egypt." So this is one of the mysteries of the Egyptians. They knew how to do this. And Pharaoh called to Moshe and Aaron and said, "You talk to Yehovah, that he will take away these frogs from me and from my people. And I will let your people go, that you may sacrifice unto Yehovah. And Moses said to Pharaoh, glory over me. When shall I entreat for you and for your servants and for your people to destroy the frogs from you and from your houses, that they will remain in the river only? He said, do it tomorrow. And he said, be it according to your word, that you may know that there is none like unto Jehovah our Elohim. And the frogs shall depart from you and from your houses and from your servants and from your people, and they shall remain in the river only. And Moshe and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried unto Jehovah because of the frogs which he had brought against Pharaoh. And Jehovah did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died out of the houses, out of the villages, and out of the fields. And they gathered them together unto heaps, and their land did stink. And Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, as a rest. And he hardened his heart, and hearkened not unto them, as Jehovah had said. And Jehovah said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your rod, and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so. And Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod, and he smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice, and man and in beast, and all the dust in the land became lice throughout all of Egypt. And the magicians, excuse me, and the magicians did so with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there was lice upon man and upon beast. Then the magician said to Pharaoh, this thing is of the finger of Elohim. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them, just as Jehovah had said. And Jehovah said to Moses, rise up early in the morning, and stand before Pharaoh, and lo, he cometh forth to the water, and say to him, this is what Jehovah says, let my people go, that they may serve me. Else, if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send a swarm of flies upon thee, and upon your servants, and upon your people, and into your houses, and in the house of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground thereon. And I will sever in that day the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies will go there, to the end that you may know that I am Jehovah, and I am in your midst of the earth. And I will put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow shall be the sign. And Jehovah said, there came a grievous swarm of flies into the house of Pharaoh and into his servants, and the houses into the land of Egypt. The land was corrupted by the reason of the swarm of flies. And Pharaoh called to Moshe and Aharon and said, go you and sacrifice to your Elohim in the land. And Moshe said, it is not meet so to do, for shall we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians to Jehovah our Elohim? Lo, shall we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their very eyes? And will they not stone us? We will go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, and sacrifice to Jehovah our Elohim, as he shall command us. And Pharaoh said, I will let you go, that you may sacrifice to Jehovah in the wilderness. Only you shall go not very far away. Do this for me. Moses said, behold, I will go out from you, and I will entreat Jehovah that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh and from his servants and from the people tomorrow. But let not Pharaoh deal deceitfully any more, and not letting the people go to sacrifice to Jehovah. And Moses went out to Pharaoh and entreated the Lord. And Jehovah did according to the words of Moses, and he removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh and from his servants and from his people. There remained not. And the Pharaoh hardened his heart at that time also, neither would he let the people go. Cool. Hey, Jonathan. So here's the long and short of this one. Pharaoh's making a deal. He's like, I'll let you, in this case he's referring to Moses and whoever is close to Moses, go out and make the sacrifices. But you can't go too far. You are my property after all. We see frogs come out of the. Okay, remember these are the 3 plagues we're learning about now. Frogs. So we see. Get the thing lined up again. So I'm sure there was a frog. I think it was Hatari. I think it was the name of the frog god, something like that. So he is being defeated. But if you're 100 miles south, you just see him doing stuff that seems crazy. Like, why is the frog god sending all these frogs out everywhere? And then comes the ground, the dirt of the ground suddenly becomes lice. I mean, what a pain in the entire body. Itch. And then suddenly swarms of biting flies come, and they're eating you alive. You're like, what is going on? What is happening? And imagine about this point, gossip is spreading rapidly throughout Egypt. Because everybody's like, Pharaoh is supposed to be a god. Why is all this happening? Why are the gods turning on Pharaoh? Why are they mad at Pharaoh? Because if Pharaoh's the king, they must be mad at the king. I mean, they ain't mad at me. The whole world's suffering. All of Egypt's suffering, right? This isn't the fault of the little guy. This is the fault of the man in the big house. That's what Pharaoh means, by the way. It means big house. He's the man in the big house. So, it must be his fault, whatever's happening. So you can imagine these people are like, how come Pharaoh ain't, what's he doing wrong? How come he's not working with the gods? Why are they turning on Pharaoh? Why are the gods against Pharaoh? And the gossip's probably starting to spread, and the word's coming down the pipe that something's going on at Pharaoh's house, and some guy probably named Moses, probably a guy, they may even know he used to be in Pharaoh's court. He used to want to be a Pharaoh's princess. He used to be a priest of Egypt. And I say that because it says that Moses knew the mysteries of the Egyptians. The only place you're going to learn the mysteries is within the religious world, because the mysteries are the hidden things of a religion. So, basically saying to him, whoever this guy is, something's going on. Apparently the gods are siding with him and not with Pharaoh. Is he supposed to be the new Pharaoh? You know, these kind of questions. And I'd like to point out too, with the you'll notice with the Egyptian priests, they could get frogs to come out of the water and come out of the ground. They knew how to make that happen. But when it came to turning inanimate objects into living things, they couldn't do that. They couldn't take dirt and make life. They couldn't take dust and make it alive. That's something a magician can't do. They can do sleight of hand. They can, do some things that seem pretty incredible to somebody that doesn't know the mysteries. But they can't make life. They can't do that. All right, so again, we're trying to put ourselves into that mindset of being, a small farmer, or just, a fisherman, somebody that lives off the Nile River. All these crazy things are happening. You've been told that there's a God over each of these things. All these gods must be going crazy. And then you hear there's something going on with the Pharaoh. Somebody's challenging the Pharaoh, and the gods are against the Pharaoh. How does the world look to someone who's not, reading this Torah? What I'm trying to get at is, it shouldn't surprise anyone that a mixed multitude left Egypt, because these people saw their gods, or at least what they thought were gods, doing these things that were against the Pharaoh. So when it came time to choose Pharaoh or God, the people chose God, because they had always believed in God. These are people, and this is just my opinion, but I believe that these are people who probably were full of faith, but they had their faith in the wrong place. These are people who loved their gods. They just weren't real God. And the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob brought those people out into the wilderness and said, I'm the real God. You want to have faith in somebody, have faith in me. And I believe that they did as much as they could. Because you got to remember, with the golden calf, everything kind of got shut down. The door was wide open. At Sinai, God's like, look, I'm going to make you a royal priesthood. We're going to be married together. Here's my ketubah. Here's the contract. Just sign it. We're good to go. You're going to be my special treasure in this world, and you're going to do what I want, and we're going to fix this place. And immediately gold calf. And it was, and it threw a wrench in the works, and threw everything off track. 40 years off track. And had to go wander in the wilderness. That means that everyone who had been born in Egypt was going to die in the wilderness. All that mixed multitude would have to die. they would become, then their children would be the Hebrews who made it into the promised land. But everybody who had been born in Egypt would die. Only Joshua and Caleb made it through. And they had been born in Egypt. But I think you understand what I'm saying. Anyone who would have followed out and found out that Yehovah was the one true God, even though they left Egypt because of the faith that they had in whatever God they had faith in, they were going to die in the wilderness. It's such a sad thing, because it wasn't everybody. And it wasn't everybody that participated in the golden calf. But it was enough that it was a problem. All right, moving on to Exodus 9. And Yehovah said to Moshe, "Go in unto Pharaoh and tell him, this is what Yehovah, the God of the Hebrews, the Elohim of the Hebrews, has said. Let my people go," it's not my Charles Neston voice, "that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let them go, and will hold them still, behold, the hand of Yehovah is upon the cattle which is in the field, and upon the horses, and upon the asses, and upon the camels, and upon the oxen, and upon the sheep. And there shall be a very grievous murrain. And Yehovah shall sever between the cattle of Egypt and the cattle of Israel. And there shall be nothing die at all, that is of the children of Israel. And Yehovah appointed a set time, saying, Tomorrow the Yehovah shall do this thing in the land. And Yehovah did that thing on the morrow, and all the cattle of Egypt died. But the cattle of the children of Israel did not even one die. And the Pharaoh sent and beheld, there was not one of the cattle of the Israelites dead. And the heart of the Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people go. And as Yehovah said unto Moshe and Aaron, Take you a handful of ashes of a furnace, and let Moses sprinkle it towards the heaven in the sight of Pharaoh. And it shall become small dust in the land of Egypt, and it shall be a boil breaking forth with blains upon a man and upon beast throughout all the land of Egypt. And they took the ashes of the furnace and stood before Moshe, and Pharaoh and Moshe sprinkled it up towards heaven. It became a boil breaking forth with blains upon man and upon beast. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boil was upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians. And Yehovah hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not listen to them. And Yehovah, just as Yehovah had spoken to Moses. And Yehovah said unto Moses, Rise up early in the morning, stand before Pharaoh, and say to him, This is what Yehovah, the Elohim of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, that they may serve me. For I will at this time send all my plagues upon your heart, and upon your servants, and upon your people, that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. For now I will stretch out my hand, that I may smite you, and that my and your people with pestilence, and they shall be cut off from the earth. And in very deed for this cause have I raised up, for to show in my power that my name may be declared throughout the earth. And yet you exalt yourself against my people, and you will not let them go. Behold, tomorrow, about this time, I will cause it to rain a very grievous hail, such as has never been seen in Egypt, and since the foundation thereof, even until now. Send therefore now, and gather your cattle, and all that you have in the field, for upon every man and beast which shall be found in the field, and shall not be brought home, the hail shall come down upon them, and they will die. And he that feared the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his cattle flee into the house. See, there's that mixed multitude. Somebody's afraid of him. And he that regarded not the word of Yehovah left his servants and cattle in the field. Obviously not afraid of him. And Yehovah said to Moses, Stretch forth your hand towards heaven, that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt, upon man and upon beast, upon every herb of the field throughout the land of Egypt. Moshe stretched forth the rod towards heaven, and Yehovah sent thunder and hail, and fire ran along the ground, and Yehovah rained hail upon the land. So there was hail, and fire mingled with hail, very grievous, such as there was none like unto the end of the land of Egypt, since it became a nation. And the hail smote throughout all the land of Egypt, all that was in the field, both man and beast. And the hail smote every herb of the field, and broke every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, was there no hail. And Pharaoh sent and called for Moshe and Aaron, and said to them, Pharaoh sent unto Moshe and Aaron, and said to them, I have sinned this time. And Jehovah is righteous, and I and my people are wicked. Entreat Jehovah that there be no more mighty thunderings and hail, and I will let you go, and I shall stay you no longer. And Moshe said to them, As soon as I am gone out of the city, I will spread abroad my hands unto Jehovah, and the thunder will cease, neither shall there be any more hail, that you may know how that the earth is Jehovah's. But as for you and your servants, I know that you will not fear the Lord God, Elohim. And the flax and the barley was smitten, for the barley was in ear, and the flax was bold. I believe being in ear means it was Abib, which is the Hebrew word for the first month of the year. But the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up. And Moshe went out of the city of Pharaoh, and spread abroad his hands unto the Lord, and the thunders and the hail ceased, and the rain was not poured out upon the earth. And when Pharaoh saw the rain and the hail and the thunders had ceased, he sinned yet more, and hardened his heart, and he and his servants. And the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, neither would he let the children of Israel go, and Jehovah, just as Jehovah had spoken to Moses. So, obviously, Jehovah knows exactly what Pharaoh's going to do. In fact, he even said he hardened Pharaoh's heart. He's not going to let Pharaoh do anything else. He's going to have to do, hey, Pharaoh says he's a god. Be a god, Pharaoh. Stand up to the creator of the universe. Let everybody see what happens. So again, let's imagine that we're living, 100 miles down the road, 100 miles down the river. Well, I should say up the river, because Pharaoh lived at the mouth of the river. These plagues are coming. The cows are dying. You're getting covered in boils. You're like, what is going on? Things are getting insane. Why are these gods doing these things? Well, are they turning against Pharaoh? If you were a small town farmer, you probably would think so. And then the man who the gods are not against, which is Moshe, is going to deliver the people, the mixed multitude, not just people who were originally from Canaan prior to the beginning of the captivity. Let's put it that way. People say 400 years in the Egyptian captivity, but rabbis say 200 and something. And I'm not sure if they're saying that that's how long it actually lasted, or that's how long it was bad. Because under Joseph, hey, they lived in Goshen. That was the best land. They took care of Pharaoh's flocks. That's a good job. You got to wonder. All right, let's move on to the half-Torah portion. Little background history. The half-Torah portion, it comes out of the time of the Greek occupation. Though the rabbis say that the Greeks would allow them to study the Torah, obviously they weren't allowed to institute any of the things they learned in the Torah. And they required that the Hebrews use the Septuagint because that was the Greek translation of the Hebrew. Now, Septuagint is from the word the 70 in Greek. And the legend is that they took 70 rabbis and put them in separate places and said, translate your word into our language. And if there's any difference between them, we'll kill you all. It's probably a little dramatic, but it turns out that it's considered the miracle of the 70 because all 70 scholars translated the Hebrew into Greek exactly the same way. Every one of them supposedly had exactly the same translation, and that's where the Septuagint comes from. All right, let's see here. What's a half-Torah? Ezekiel 28:25. Get that brought up. And again, I like to use the Blue Letter Bible for reference because, of course, it's got cross references to tons of different sources. You know, all your standard Thayer's lexicon, Strong's Concordance, and a lot of modern Hebrew speakers complain that the Strong's Concordance doesn't do a good job of translating the Hebrew because it's not. Well, he's not a native born Israelite, so he doesn't know how they use stuff. But so yeah, the half-Torah portion. 28:25. This is Ezekiel. Now remember, Ezekiel is the prophet during the Babylonian captivity. He's at the beginning. He comes out of Israel into Babylon with the people. Thus saith Yehovah Elohim, when I shall have gathered the house of Israel from the people among whom they are scattered, and shall be sanctified in them in the sight of the heathen, then shall they dwell in their land that I have given to my servant Jacob. And they shall dwell safely therein, and shall build houses and plant vineyards, yea, they shall dwell with confidence. And when I have executed judgment upon all those that despise them around them, they shall know that I am Yehovah, their Elohim. I'll continue through 29:1 all the way to 21. And you got to remember that this is a people who had been defeated. This is a people who had not only felt the pain of a Babylonian defeat, because you got to understand, the Assyrians were the masters of terrorism. These guys, they invaded northern Israel. The Assyrians came in. You got to remember in the story, what is that, Isaiah? They come up to the gates. They come up Jerusalem, like yell over the wall in Hebrew, hey, you better open up because we're going to come in there. And Isaiah and Hezekiah is there, and Isaiah goes out to them and says, God's going to put a hook in your mouth and take you away from here. And he did. They ended up wandering off and weren't able to get in. But they had destroyed the northern kingdom. I mean, they chopped people's heads off, put them in catapult, throw the head over the wall, and let them know that's what was coming if they didn't give up. Heck, probably if they did give up, they'd probably still kill most people, and they took a lot of them as slaves. But that's what happened to when you hear the phrase the lost tribes of Israel. Those are the people who lived in the land, the kingdom called Israel in northern Israel. They were all the tribes except Judah and Benjamin. Levi was spread throughout the whole kingdom because the Levites had city-states that they had to maintain, and they, of course, taught the law and helped with the sacrifice, all that type of stuff. So they actually had multiple cities spread throughout the kingdom. So some of the Levites ended up in Israel in the north. In fact, that's where the modern-day Samaritans come from. It was an Israelite Levite who came and taught them how to worship Yehovah on Mount Gerizim. But in the southern kingdom, it was called Judah, and Judah was not conquered by the Assyrians, but it was conquered by the Babylonians, actually multiple times. First, Nebuchadnezzar came in, he took the king and replaced him with his own choice for who king should be. And that was not uncommon. When a ruler came in and created a vassal state, he would put in a ruler that he felt would be a friend. And you may have heard the term in movies about Rome, are you a friend of Caesar? Are you Caesar's friend? Are you doing his works? Basically is what it boils down to. And in fact, here we go. I'm going to start talking about the Maccabean revolt again. After the Maccabean revolt had ended, the Maccabees were Levites. Then the problem was they created a kingdom. Technically the ruler was called an ethnarch, which is a very strange word that's not even used pretty much anywhere else. I think it was Josephus that called him an ethnarch. But it was Judah Maccabee, and his family became what is known as the Hasmonean dynasty. Now, the Hasmonean kings continued all the way up to the beginning of Imperial Rome. When Augustus Caesar became Caesar, he got rid of the last Hasmonean ruler in Israel and replaced him with Herod the Great. Basically, Herod was an Edomite who was a part of the court of the Hasmonean kings, and basically he knew that Herod would do the job he wanted him to, and he didn't have to worry about the Hasmoneans. So you actually see the remnants of the Hasmoneans marrying, and you see their story in the New Testament. The princess who wanted John the Baptist's head on a platter, she was a Hasmonean. She was a Levite princess. But you got to remember that the Levites were never allowed to have a kingdom. The rod was never to pass from Judah until Shiloh come, you know. So they were doing something that was considered real sketchy to begin with. But that's another can of worms. But the Hasmonean kings, which were Levites, when Assyria conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, they took a lot of captives. Now, the way God describes it, he's basically said, look, I'm the one that brought the hammer down. I'm spreading you out through all the nations. You'll go out to the nations. You'll speak my name unto them. They will come to know who I am through you. And then one day they're going to look at you and say, what are you doing here with us? You're supposed to be in the promised land with your God. Why aren't you there? And they will send the people out to God. They will send him out from their lands to return them to Israel, which is, I mean, I believe that's what's happening today. I believe that's a part of what, even in Nazi Germany, you have to look up what was called the Vaiera Agreement. Prior to the beginning of World War II, when Hitler was just the prime minister in Germany, he signed an agreement with Zionist organizations called the Vaiera Agreement, where they would, I think it was, they charged, the price was £1,500 sterling, which is a lot of money. I mean, it's like $250,000, I think, today, in today's money. But they would take, hey, Chris, good to see you. They would take people from Germany-controlled areas who were Jewish, and they would send them to Israel to begin the rebuilding of Palestine and the nation-state of Israel. You got to understand, I'm telling you that Hitler was sending Jews to Israel to rebuild Israel. He didn't just charge them money. He sent them with £1,500 sterling worth of German material, industrial materials, for the building of the Jewish state in Israel. So, some people say, was Hitler a Zionist after all? Was he actually, trying to build Israel? Maybe so. I think he was a good Catholic, and he was just doing what the Pope told him to do. And then, of course, ended up creating his own religion, which was the Nazi religion, which was an official religion in Germany at one time during World War II. All right, well, let's get back into the Word. So the people who are with Ezekiel are the ones who were taken into Babylon, and that was the tribe of Judah and Benjamin and the Levites. They went into Babylon. Now they did re-encounter some of their people in Babylon, because the Babylonians had conquered the Assyrians and taken many of the Assyrian slaves and such. So a lot of them did reunite together. And the rabbis now, they'll tell you, that they don't like the idea of an Ephraimite people trying to return to Israel, because they say, there's no point in Ephraim returning. Ephraim returned in Babylon. There's no point in there being these people coming in. I disagree, because lots of people were sold into slavery, spread throughout the known world at the time, in the years between the Babylonian and Assyrian, when the Babylonians defeated the Assyrians. So there's plenty of time for those Israelites to get spread to the four corners of the earth, so to speak. I'm not a flat earther, by the way. It's not what I meant when I said four corners. Let's say to the four cardinal directions. That's probably a better way of saying that. So Ezekiel is prophesying to the people, a people who had been defeated by Nebuchadnezzar. And you got to understand, Nebuchadnezzar didn't just come in and kick in the door and butcher everybody the first time he came. When he first came, he set up his own king, his vassal king. Like we discussed, Herod the Great was a vassal king for Augustus Caesar. So he set up his vassal king, and his vassal king was supposed to pay his taxes and run the government in the way in which Nebuchadnezzar approved of. And that was Zedekiah, I believe, was that king. Can anyone confirm that was Zedekiah was the king at the time? or was he the one that was taken to Babylon? Basically, the last time that when the Babylonians came the last time Nebuchadnezzar came in, that was when Jeremiah was, prophesying, better let him in, stop fighting them. When he came in that last time, they took the vassal king that he had made a vassal king, put his eyes out, let me put it in right order. He killed all of his sons in front of him. Then he put his eyes out so that the last thing he would ever have seen with his eyes would be the death of his children. That was what Nebuchadnezzar did to the man that he had made. I think it was Zedekiah. He had made the king. All right, so let's continue. In the 10th year and in the 10th month and in the 12th day of the month, the word of Yehovah came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face against the Pharaoh king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against all of Egypt. Speak and say, This is what Yehovah your Elohim. This is what says Yehovah Elohim. Behold, I am against you, Pharaoh king of Egypt, the great dragon that lies in the midst of his waters, which has said, My river is my own, and I have made it for myself. Pharaoh was god of the river, huh? But I will put hooks in your jaws, and I will cause the fish of your rivers to stick unto your scales, and I will bring you up in the midst of the rivers, and all the fish of the rivers shall stick unto your scales. And I will leave you thrown into the wilderness. You and all the fish of your rivers shall fall upon the open fields, and you shall not be brought together nor gathered. I have given you for meat to the beasts of the field and to the fowls of the heaven. And all the inhabitants of Egypt shall know that I am Yehovah, because that they have been a staff of reed to the house of Israel. When they took hold of you by the hand, you did break and rend all their shoulder. And when they leaned upon you, you brake and made all their loins to be a stand. But he's basically saying that Egypt didn't help. They didn't help Israel. And now the Babylonians are coming for Egypt too. And when they took, thus says the Lord, Yehovah Elohim, behold, I will bring a sword upon you, and I will cut off man and beast out of you. And Egypt shall be a desolate waste, and they shall know that I am Yehovah, because he hath said, The river is mine, and I have made it. Behold, therefore, I am against you and against your rivers, and I will make the land of Egypt utterly a waste and desolate. And from the tower of Sin even unto the border of Ethiopia, no foot of man shall pass through it, nor foot of beast shall pass through it. Neither shall it be inhabited for 40 years. And I will make the land of Egypt desolate in the midst of the countries that are desolate, and her cities among the cities that lie in waste, and shall be desolate 40 years. And I will scatter the Egyptians among the nations, and will disperse them through countries. Yet, thus says Yehovah Elohim, at the end of 40 years will I gather the Egyptians from the people, whither they were scattered. And I will bring again the captivity of Egypt, and will cause them to return to the land of Patros, into the land of their habitation, and there shall be there a base kingdom. It shall be the basest of kingdoms, neither shall it exalt itself any more above the nations, for I will diminish them, that they shall no more rule over the nations. It shall be no more the confidence of the house of Israel, which bringeth their iniquity to remembrance, when they shall look after them. But they shall know that I am Yehovah your Elohim. And it will come to pass in the 7th month, the 12th year, and in the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, the word of Yehovah came to me, saying, Son of man, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, caused his army to serve a great service against Tyrus. Every head was made bald, and every shoulder was peeled. Yet had he no wages, nor his army for Tyrus, for the service that he had served against it. Therefore thus says Yehovah Elohim, Behold, I will give the land of Egypt unto Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and he shall take her multitude, and take her spoil, and take her prey, and it shall be the wages for his army. And I have given him the land of Egypt for his labor, wherein he has served against it, because he has wrought me, says, because they have wrought for me, says, listen, I have given him the land of Egypt for his labor, wherewith he served against it, because they wrought for me, says Yehovah. In that day I will cause the horn of the house of Israel to bud forth, and I will give you an opening of the mouth in the midst of them, and they shall know that I am Yehovah Elohim. This is clear. Babylon gets to take Egypt as a spoil of war for the service that Babylon did to Yehovah in destroying Tyre. The city of Tyre is an island city off the coast of Israel. Tyre and Sidon is where Jezebel came from. That's their god is Hercules, or I think not Marduk. I think it's Marquis or something, Marquess or something. It might be similar to Marduk in the Akkadians, but it's Hercules is who it is among the Greeks. That's the god of Tyre. Hercules is the Baal of Tyre. Whenever you read in Isaiah, it talks about, the king of Tyre, prince of Tyre. Well, the king of Tyre is Hercules, and the prince of Tyre is the king, the human king. Basically, Isaiah is saying Nebuchadnezzar is going to come and kick all the Tyrians right in their butts and take the whole place as spoil because of what they have done to Israel. Because you got to remember, King Ahab, or Ahab, he, and his name literally means loved one. Great name. His love is his name. He loved Jezebel, and Jezebel was a Tyrian princess. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a history with Tyre and Egypt because Hiram Abiff, I just said a name that would make Mason ears perk up. Hiram was the man who built Solomon's temple for him. He was the king of Tyre. He knew about building temples to Baal. And Solomon's like, you're the best temple builder there is, so build me a temple for my God. And Hiram came and built a temple. And he was a great friend to Israel. Well, at least Solomon's Israel. But again, remember, Solomon's the guy that put every idol you could think of inside the temple of Yehovah. But Hiram was a friend to Israel. Later, though, his descendant Jezebel came, and Jezebel married Ahab, and that was the first. When that happened, things got so bad that you see the appearance of the first prophet. That's Elijah. Elijah appears. He's not even an Israelite. He's a Tishbite. Can't even figure out who the Tishbites were. But he appeared, and he went to war. And when I say went to war, he ran away. He declared God's judgment and ran from Jezebel. He comes in and says, for 3 years there'll be no rain. And then hightails it because he knows Jezebel wants him dead. He's the one who killed all the priests. Well, I shouldn't say, I don't know, should I say he killed them all? He's the one who, when the priest of Baal, who were Jezebel's priests. There was two priestesses. There's Baal and Asherah, or Ishtar, or Easter, if you prefer. She's the female tree goddess. Baal is the fire god. He's the god of the sun. He's sun god, fire god. So the priest of Baal, again, the fire god, build an altar, and he says, look, call on your God to light that altar on fire, and I'll give you some time, and then I'll call on my God, and whichever one lights it on fire, this is the real God. Fair enough. So they agree. 500 priests of Baal get out there. These are Jezebel's friends. These are people on her payroll. These are people she spent her childhood probably with, because she probably imported them from Tyre. And they get out there, and they're all day cutting themselves, because self-mutilation, get blood out of you. You make a sacrifice. They're out there cutting themselves and calling on God, and Elijah's, very tongue-in-cheek says, well, maybe your God's asleep, because their God is Hercules. Or maybe he's on a big adventure. Maybe he's on a great journey. That's what he said. Maybe he's on a journey, because it's Hercules. And he's like, well, maybe he fell asleep. Maybe he's been drinking and he fell asleep. Drinking, you know how Hercules drinks a lot. He went to sleep. Probably need to yell louder so he can hear you. But, you know, nothing happened. And then, of course, Elijah said, all right, pour water all over the altar and I'll call on God. And he did, and God, fire came down from heaven, lapped up everything, destroyed it. And he said, all right, there, you happy now, Israel? Everything's proved. You have signs and wonders to demonstrate. Kill the priests of Baal. And that's what they did. They went to killing the priests of Baal. And that made Jezebel furious. And that's when she went out after Elijah. And like I said, he's the first prophet. Things got so bad under Ahab that God sent the first prophet, you know, to start whooping things into place. When I say I mean Samuel's a prophet, but it had been a long time since someone had seen a prophet in Israel until that started going on. And you got to understand, when a prophet shows up in Israel, it's not a good thing. Prophets come because they got one message: return to covenant or I will kill you. That's the typical message from a prophet. And that's kind of like when Elijah said, he said, for 3 years there'll be no rain. You know, and he left. He wasn't making up something new. It wasn't like he was like, you know, let me roll the dice and see which, I need to pray and let God tell me which punishment he's going to bring. No, he's already told you what the punishments are. He wrote them out in Deuteronomy. The punishments have already been made clear. You know, if you walk contrary to me, I will give you no rain. That's one of the punishments listed. You know, if you walk contrary to me, and eventually you will eat your own children, which is exactly what happened when Jerusalem was under siege. And I can't remember which king it was, but he was walking, and it was Elisha was inside the siege with the elders, and the king said, well, why don't you do something? You know, why don't you call on God? He said, tomorrow you're going to be dead and the siege will be over. And anyways, I meant to mention a while ago that regarding the half-Torah portion, which is what we're reading, the half-Torah portion was established because in some places where you weren't allowed to read the Torah, or people didn't have a Torah scroll, they would read something that kind of reiterated what was in the Torah. And as you see here, we're reading Ezekiel. I mean, it's almost like we're seeing some of the Egyptian plagues coming again. But in this case, of course, that's a judgment coming down on Egypt. I think it's really interesting that he mentions the fish bit, because Dagon's a fish god. And I'm sure that the Egyptians had their own fish god. And this is some astrotheology that I'm about to explain to you. The ages of the earth are divided by epochs, which are measured by what stars are in the sky over this just before the sun comes up on an equinox. That's how you know what epoch or age the earth is in. And it's an ancient way of telling time. The beginning of one of the ages is the age of Pisces. That's the one that we're supposed to be in now. So the age of Pisces. Prior to that would have been the age of Aries. Prior to that would have been the age of Taurus. And prior to that would have been the age of Gemini. Each of these ages seems to have a god associated with it, which is an enemy to God. If you start with Gemini is twins. Oftentimes pictured as a male and a female. You may consider Adam and Eve to be the first enemies of God. Depends on how you look at it. They're certainly the first ones that cause a lot of trouble. But you know, I guess that's just us. When we hit a planet, there's going to be some trouble. And you got to remember too that these guys, Adam was not born of woman. Adam was made from dirt. He was made of Adama. He's made from red clay. He's made from the earth itself. So his grandchildren, and you got to understand, he lived, you know, I can't remember exactly, probably 900 years, somewhere around there. I mean, he was almost 1,000 years old when he died. I mean, Methuselah's oldest 969 years, but Adam was old, and all of his children. I mean, he would have had what, 6-7 generations of grandchildren under him, all of them looking at him as the God man, as the man that God had made with his own two hands? I mean, you know, and his wife pulled from his own body. Eve was not born of woman. She was born of man. The two of them were unlike anything else that existed in the human world. So you may think of them as the first two gods even though they may not have meant to be in opposition to God, people may have turned them into something in opposition to God. You know, Adam, it says that in the garden that God halacha with Adam, which is to say he walked with Adam in the garden. When you say walk in the Hebrew sense, it means that's the being taught. You know, Christ says, you know, walk the straight and the narrow path. You know, he is the way, which is a path. He's the place you're supposed to be walking to. And what you're supposed to be walking through. You know, I am the door, etc., etc. So anywho, the next age is the age of Taurus, right? Taurus is a bull. So, and this is the way I introduce, like if I'm telling people about the historical periods and stuff, like, what does the sound that a cow makes? You know, this is the way you teach, you know, pre-kindergartners. Cow go moo. You know, lamb go baa. You know, fish don't make noise because they live in the water. But take the word king. In Hebrew, it's melech, right? So, who would the cow king be? He would be Mulek. You know, he's the cow god. He's Mulek. He's the cow king, king of cows, Mulek, or Moloch, as you might call him. And remember, in the images of Moloch, he's a cow-headed god that they're sacrificing their babies to. And then next comes, you know, lamb, the Aries, which is a ram. And a ram goes, ba. So who is the god of the sheep? That would be Baal. Baal is the god of the sheep. So it's Baal. Sheep god. And then Dagon is the one that comes next, and that would be a fish god. And dog is a fish in Hebrew. Dog is fish. So Dagon is fish god. And in fact, when if you recall the story of Jonah went to Nineveh. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. Nineveh was the home of the people who had come and butchered and destroyed and taken into captivity the northern kingdom of Israel. So you can see why Jonah would not want to go there. I mean, number one, I'm sure he's thinking, they're going to kill me or enslave me when I get there, and they're sure not going to listen to me. So, you know, God's like, I don't care about any of that, go. And, you know, Jonah's like, no, I ain't going to do it. And it ends up, of course, Jonah gets swallowed up into a giant fish, or a dag swallows him, right? So the dag swims him all the way to near Nineveh and then throws him up on the beach. So you can imagine to the people that were there, Dagon has sent a prophet unto us. We must listen to him. He was brought from the mouth of a giant fish. A giant Dagon brought him, right? So he goes, and the people listen to him, which made him mad. He didn't like. And it just goes to show me that when God's got a message, he'll send it in a way that it can make sense to people. He's not gonna. You're not gonna have to be a religious scholar to figure out when God's talking to you, you know. And in that case, he sent. And here's the thing. This is a two-sided coin, right? Had Jonah obeyed God when he said, "Go and tell the Ninevites this, tell them to repent," had he obeyed, they probably would not have repented, and God would have destroyed Nineveh in the seeing of Israel, right? Because Nineveh was destroyed later, but you know, not at that day, because they were given a reprieve because they repented. But because Jonah refused to obey, he created a means for the people he hated to get to repent. So, you know, it's always a good idea to do what God says when he says it. Or you might end up serving the people you hate without even meaning to. and given them opportunities that they would have never had without your own stubbornness. But maybe that was the point. He's like, look, Jonah's not going to go when I tell him to go. All right, let me look at some of these. I don't know if who's out there still listening, but the Torah portion, like I said, the half Torah we just read, which was Ezekiel, which is him prophesying to the people, saying, look, you remember how you guys thought that Egypt was so great? Because you got to understand, Egypt was a strong empire. I mean, it was. It had an army. It had food. They had water. Israel sometimes sent envoys for help from Egypt. Like I mentioned earlier, King Josiah, who found the book of Deuteronomy. Egypt was literally coming across Israel to help fight the Assyrians. And Josiah came out and met him, and Pharaoh was like, why are you preventing me from doing what God has commanded me to do? And Josiah wanted something. I assume it was the Ark of the Covenant. I don't know, but he wanted something because Pharaoh had been given direct access to word from Elohim, and he was acting on his words. And Pharaoh, and I don't know, can someone look it up for me, but there's a scripture where Yehovah refers to Egypt as his hammer. Like he's like, basically he's saying, if I want to, I'll grab a hold of Egypt and use it like a sword and defend Israel or punish Israel, you know. Anywho, though, Ezekiel's assuring them that, yes, Egypt turned their backs on us. Don't worry. God's going to whoop them good. But it's not because they turned their back on Israel. It's because Babylon did what God wanted by destroying Tyre. Because Tyre had it coming from back when Jezebel came. And he's taking care of business, you know, even with the people thrown into captivity, Yehovah's still out there tying up the loose ends, taking care of business. And he even rewarded, he said, I'm giving Egypt to him as a reward. And if you actually look in the historical documents, it actually does show that Babylon didn't really do a great conquering of Egypt, but they did raid it. They took the gold and silver for sure, and plenty of slaves. But I think the historical record records that it didn't become a vassal state of Babylon. But kind of the way that God's describing it sounds to me like he's saying, go and take all the treasure and all the slaves you want. I'm paying you for your good service. All right, so let's look in the New Testament, or the Brit Hadashah, as some folks refer to it as. And that is, of course, because people say you shouldn't call it Testament, because a Testament requires someone to be dead to be in effect. So we don't want to think of God as dead. Or, hey, Debbie, we don't want to think of God as dead, or as Yeshua is dead, because that would kind of defeat the purpose of us being here talking about it. I use a website called sheepfoldgleanings.com. And they have a usual list of just a few scriptures. And usually when you read through it, sometimes when you spend a lot of time reading the Old Testament and studying the Torah, lots of times you'll come across pieces that you recognize from the New Testament, because the majority of the New Testament is straight out of the Old Testament. The New Testament writers are people who were raised Hebrew. They were raised Israelite. They were raised in the religion of Israel, waiting for the Messiah and understanding why they needed a Messiah. Modern rabbis will tell you that the reason that we needed a Messiah was because of the sin of Ahab. Like, the Jews themselves could have fixed the world. Like, that's the way they look at it. Like, if there hadn't been an Ahab, they could have got around eventually to fixing the world and being that royal priesthood. But once Ahab and Jezebel happened, things just went haywire. And they literally needed a Messiah to save them from that. That's the way the Jews talk about Messiah, which is obviously a little different than the way that Christians think of who Messiah is. So let me look in the All right, today is, our Torah portion is Vaiera, and we've already read it. We've already read the Torah portion. It's about the plagues, essentially, and not all of them. And we didn't see the darkness. We didn't see the death of the firstborn yet. But we did see where the line is drawn between what the magicians can do and what Moses, or what should I say, what Yehovah can do. The magicians could turn the river to blood. They could do that. They could get frogs to come up out of the water. They could do that. But they could not turn inanimate, dead earth into living things. They could not make life from death. They don't have that power. And I think that there may be a lesson in there for us. That God's like, certain things you ain't going to be able to do. You ain't going to be able to bring something that's dead. And it's odd because, of course, in modern science, they're trying so hard to figure out how to make dead, inanimate, mineral material become biological material. And I mean, literally, can you imagine being in some of these labs? I mean, it really would look like magic. Somebody didn't have any idea what was going on. And they're trying their hardest to get it to happen. In fact, I was reading on somebody's Facebook post, a scientist had posted in the journal Nature that he had done it, and then he published a recantation and said, "Whoops, my findings have not been repeatable, and I may have spoken too soon without doing enough research, and I'm withdrawing what I said before." And I thought that was that's good. I mean, I respect the scientist, because he even said that he thinks that because he had certain preconceptions about how things were supposed to be, he was working his science to serve his preconceptions as opposed to doing the experiment. See, when you do scientific experimentation, you're not supposed to come to it with a conclusion. You're not trying to prove what you already think is true. You're trying to let the evidence speak for itself, and then you draw conclusions from the evidence. That's good science. When you come in there and you're like, well, I know that evolutionary theory is true, so I'm going to do whatever it takes to prove that, then you naturally are going to throw out results that don't prove that. You're going to resist evidence that could lead you to other ideas in other places. And that's the difference between being a good scientist and being somebody who is a religious scientist. And when I say that, I mean science, just like religion, has a priesthood, and they are enshrined at the universities, and they teach certain things and not other things. And I'm not in a position to tell you what's right and what's wrong in that world. I can just tell you that people are religious by nature, and they will defend their religious beliefs whether they call it science or not. They will defend it the way a person defends themselves in the religion that they believe in. All right, so let's look in the, let's see what we got here. Somebody posted Romans 9:14 through 17. Romans 9:14 through 17. As a Brit reading that would go along. It's probably going to mention some of the plagues. Usually what we do with the Brit reading is we try to find places in the New Testament that mirror some of what we read in the Old Testament. Some things are harder to find than others, but I don't think the plagues in Egypt are going to be hard to find. All right, let's see, Romans 9:14. This is Paul, or Rabbi Shaul, writing. What shall you say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? No, God forbid. For he says to Moses, I have mercy upon whom I will have mercy, and compassion upon whom I will have compassion. By the way, that's what he said at the cleft in the rock, when he put him in the cleft of the rock. He said, He said, look, I'm going to walk all my glory right before you, but I'm going to have mercy upon whoever I have mercy, and compassion upon whoever I have compassion. Basically, he's saying to Moses, ain't none of your business what I do in my time. And unfortunately, it's a marriage relationship, God's like, look, I ain't going to cheat on you, but you don't need to know everything I'm doing all the time. And if I decide to give a woman you don't know, $10,000, then that's my decision. And I did not do you wrong. And I will not shorten my hand to you because I extended a hand to them. He's pretty awesome. He don't take much flack. I mean, he's merciful and forgiving and kind and puts up with so much. He don't have to. Let's see. Compassion upon whom I have compassion. So then, it is not of him that wills, nor of him that runs, but of God that shows mercy. For the scripture says unto Pharaoh, even for this same purpose have I raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name might be declared throughout all of the earth. So, therefore hath he mercy on whom he will have mercy, and whom he will harden, he hardens. So basically saying, like, he looked Pharaoh right in the face. He's like, the only reason you're Pharaoh is because you could be here during these few weeks while I'm using you for these 10 plagues. That's why you're Pharaoh. That's why you decided to kill children and throw them in. Can you imagine how strange that would have been? I mean, can you imagine how many people probably were under Pharaoh going, what is this guy doing? Why is he murdering children? Is this our Pharaoh? Is this the man is this the man the gods have put in charge of us? A murderer? Well, I guess we better keep our mouths shut. He'll kill us too, I'll bet. And he's like, I'm the one that got you to do that. Jehovah's just looking around him saying, the only reason you did everything you did is because I put it in you to do it so that I could use you for my purposes. For my people whom I love. That's kind of the deal, y'all. If he is creator, if this is his world, if he made you, if he wants to use you, he will. I'm talking to the people, unbelieving people. I'm saying to you, you might hate God, you might not believe in God, but he'll sure grab a hold of you and use you if he wants to. And you might not even know it happened. You might say a sentence to someone who's believing, who was waiting on confirmation for a year, and you just said some stupid sentence that you thought you made up that came out of you, didn't have anything to do with anything, and that person's eyes pop wide open and say, that's what I've been waiting on, It's just I guess the point I'm making is just like Paul's saying, is that he's going to use whoever he wants to. He's going to show mercy whoever he wants to show mercy. He's going to show compassion whoever he wants to show compassion. And he's going to honor the covenants that he makes, because he's the God of covenants. He's a God who makes a deal and sticks with it. He does not lie. He's like, I'm not a man that I should lie. I bound myself into a contract. I'll keep it. People will say things like, well, can God do anything? And he'll say, well, yeah, of course God can do anything. Well, can God make a rock? Yes. Well, can God lift a rock? Yes. Can God make a rock he can't lift? That's a logical problem. But God has constrained himself many times for different reasons. Like, for instance, after the great flood, he said, I put my bow in the sky as a sign, as a covenant with the world, that I'm not going to do anything like this again. It's not that he can't do it. He's just not going to do it, because he has bound himself. He's the only one who can constrain him, and he constrained himself. He's never going to do it again. When he makes a covenant with the people, he's constrained himself in what he is going to do concerning them. So, for instance, if he tells you, I'm going to feed you, like, for instance, here's the rules. He says, in the Shemitah year, you may not plant or reap. And then in the Jubilee year, you can't do it either. So that means there'll be a 2-year period. Actually, 3 years. You can't plant for 3 years. It'll be 2 years, you'll only be able to reap what's in the field. If you lived your life with no grocery store, and you ate only what came out of that field that you had planted and taken care of, can you imagine how frightening it would be for your God to say, don't even plant 1 year. I'll give you enough. Just don't plant. That's terrifying. Then he says, oh, you know what? Every once in a while, every 50 years, don't plant for 2 years straight. I'll give you enough to cover those 2 years. Can you imagine a 2-year paid vacation? Can you? I mean, in one hand, you're like, wow, that's awesome. On the other hand, you're like, there's no way that he could feed me for 2 years. There's just no way. There's no way we could store up enough. There's no way. Because that's the life that we live now, unfortunately. We live a life paycheck to paycheck. We live a life day by day, you know. And I don't mean in the sense of we're waiting on him to give us our bread daily. I'm not talking about daily bread day by day. Give me my manna, please. I'm going to wander around in this wilderness until I can be with you. No, I mean people live paycheck to paycheck, as in they are terrified of not getting paid for a week, much less not getting to work for a year or two. I mean, he's asking them to do things that we can't even comprehend in the modern world. In the modern world, we might say, well, if I had $1 million, I could take 2 years off. I just go buy my food at the grocery store and eat out whenever I wanted to. Well, you couldn't do that then. There was no grocery store to go to. There's no light switch to turn on. There's no cell phone to call anybody on. There's none of that. None of that existed. There was the fire you had in your house, and the food you grew in the field, and the animals you had that you took care of. And you lived off of them. And you had to hope. And if you had hard times come, you better hope your neighbors take care of you. And if a real hard time come like a famine, your neighbors ain't got nothing either. So you got nobody to depend on but God. It was just consider it. It's like he said, look, every 7 years there'll be a famine, and you're going to make it happen. But I'm going to give you so much that it won't even matter that you're in a famine every 7 years. Anyways, let's move on to, let's see. Somebody suggested 2 Corinthians 6:14. I'm drinking out of my daughter's Sukkot championship cup. She won the cornhole toss at Sukkot with one of her friends, Abby. So yeah, I thank her that she lets me use her cup. All right, let's see, 6:14. Be you not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship has righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion has light with darkness? And what concord has Christ with Belial, or Belial? And what part hath he that believes with an infidel? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God, and as God has said, I will dwell in them and walk in them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. This is a Pharisee talking. He's telling you the temple of the living God. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith Jehovah, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and I will be a father unto them, and they will be my sons and daughters, says the Almighty. So is he talking about the mixed multitude? I mean, he's dealing with a mixed multitude. He's got these Greeks, these Corinthians. I mean, that's where the word Corinthian column comes from, by the way. You got these folks who they're Macedonians. I mean, think about it. That's it's what in modern day is Turkey. The Turks are Greeks. I mean, they're like the northern Greeks, right? That's the Turks, right? Or the eastern side of the Aegean Sea. I think that's the eastern side of the Aegean Sea. But that's where Alexander the Great went first. So they were the kingdom of Macedonia, and so these are the guys who later became the Turkish Empire, which is the a Muslim empire, the kingdom of Istanbul that used to be Constantinople. That's in Turkey, at the mouth of the Black Sea, I believe is where that is. He's saying, What concord has Christ with Belial? In other words, if you believe in the Messiah, Israel, then you don't need to believe in any of the Baal worship that you were a part of before. And he says, what agreement does the temple of God have with idols? And is that a little stab at Solomon, by the way, that he would say that? For you are a temple. Yes, the Ottoman Empire, exactly. Yes, the Ottoman. I was thinking that's the thing you put your feet on. Yeah, the Ottoman. That's it. He said, what agreement does that, like I said, is that a little stab at Solomon? You got to wonder. He says, as for you, you are the temple of the living God. And as God has said, I will dwell in them and walk with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. So it sounds to me like he's saying, just like that mixed multitude left Egypt, and Jehovah spoke to all of them from Sinai and said, you will be a royal priesthood. He's saying that deal is still standing. That is still the deal. If you will come and you will let him be in you, he will dwell in you. If you will become a holy person, if you will follow Christ, if you will leave behind Belial, if you will stop with the other gods and the idols that you've messed with before, if you will learn the difference between what is separate and what is what's kosher and what ain't kosher. And he said, what's it say? Wherefore come out from among them and be ye separate. That would be Kodesh. Kodesh in the Hebrew, separate. Says Jehovah, touch not the unclean thing. This is Paul. All you folks, I doubt anybody listening to this is one of these people. I've been chatting with a lot of folks on Facebook, and man, they just fight tooth and nail. Paul's doing away with the law, etc., etc. And he just said, don't touch an unclean thing. What is an unclean, a non-Kodesh thing? And I will be a father to you, and you will be my sons. He's not saying you be my slaves. He's not saying you're going to be my buddies. No, Abraham was his friend. He said, you're going to be my sons. I will be your father. And you can be my daughter, speaking to the ladies. And all you got to do, give up on the idols, learn what the difference between being clean and unclean is, and he can receive you then. Because he's not going to dirty himself up. And that's the thing. It's like, he's kind, but you can't get but so close, because he's holy. He's separate. He's set apart. He's different. He's not a common thing, so you can't treat him like he's common. Don't get me wrong. I spent my whole life, saying, "Oh, well, God's right here watching me," and He sees what I does, and He hears what I'm thinking. And in a certain sense, I did think of that as being common. But no, the reason I feel that way is because God's like, no, you're not common. You're set apart to be a Kodesh, holy people. That's why you think about me like that all the time, because that's the way it's supposed to be. But when you do things that are unholy, when you do the things that are common, when you do the things that are that are of the world, I guess I'd say, there's a separation that you have imposed. And it's, gosh, I know there's some things I do, I just feel terrible after I do them. And there's some things I do that I don't feel terrible about. Even though they probably, if the Orthodox Jew look at me like, you super worldly, and I'd say, well, I can see God in those things. It doesn't affect me. But at the same time, I talk to people who still keep Christmas and Easter, and they said, I see God in these things. It doesn't, to me, they're holy things. And I'm like, I want to argue with them, but I know I do things that I consider to be all right, and they're probably not. I think we're all in the process of becoming better than we were. And sometimes I talk to people, and I swear they say the same things that I was saying 2-3 years ago. And it's like, and I even said to one guy, I was like, you sound just like I did 2 or 3 years ago, man. You need to know about this and this and this. And he blocked me. And I was like, I probably would have blocked that guy 2-3 years ago. Told me that. Told me he knew more than I did. Knew me better than I knew myself, Oh, anywho. So Paul, he's so often just, people can't make sense of him, because you got to remember, listening to Paul talk is like listening to an Orthodox rabbi talk. He talks about things that aren't necessarily just what's in the Torah. He talks about things that he was taught in the rabbinical learning. Like he talks about them things that him and Gamaliel was talking about. For instance, so there's a big controversy in the book of Acts, right? You know, the Jews want to do something. We're gonna do something about this problem of these, you know, the unbelievers here in the temple and such. These Greeks coming in the temple, and they bring it to Gamaliel. And what does he say? He says, if God's in it, it will prosper. If He is not, it will fail. That's it. He didn't say pick up stones and kill them, beat them with the lashes. No, he just said if God's in it, it'll prosper. If He's not, it'll fail. Simple, simplistic, and probably accurate. Because, I mean, shoot, you could say that to a modern rabbi today and say, look at what Gamaliel said. He said if God's in it, it'll prosper, and if He's not, it'll fail. And as far as I can see, it looks like Christianity's done about the most to bring peace to this world. I ain't talking about Catholicism, no. Even though even under the Roman yoke, I mean, Pax Romani, you know, the peace of the Romans was something that people talked about in the ancient world. Which really is, it's the peace of having God involved in what's going on. I mean, let's face it, we can't live without law. And I see these young people at, you know, these Antifa rallies and stuff talking about being, you know, anarchists and stuff like that. I'm like, there could be no worse way to live than anarchy. There's only one way to be safe in anarchy. Kill everyone else. That's how anarchy should work. Murder everyone except yourself, and then you'll be safe. Except from the wild beasts. Because the most dangerous thing in the world is other people. Right? Oh, so anyways, let's look at Revelation 16. And I feel for reading this one. I don't know what's coming. Again, this was JR's class he was going to teach, and last minute I got pulled into having to do it because he was using a particular streaming program that failed because his internet connection gave out on him somehow, and then he was on the stream with me about the first half, and then he actually has a group, a Torah study group that he goes to, which I can't blame him. There's nothing better than getting to sit and share with people about the Word. All right, let's read Revelation 16. I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, go your ways, pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome, grievous sore upon men, which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image. A plague. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as blood of a dead man. And every living soul in the sea died. And the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and the waters and the fountains, and they became blood. And I heard the angel of the water say, you are righteous, O Yehovah, which art, and which was, and which shall be, because you have judged thusly. So it isn't tough when an angel's like, yeah, he did the right thing, y'all deserved it. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and you have given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. And I heard another out of the altar say, even so, Yehovah, Elohim, Almighty One, true and righteous are your judgments. And the fourth angel poured out of his vial upon the sun, and the power was given him that it should scorch men with fire. And the men were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which had the power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and the kingdom full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain, and they blasphemed the Elohim of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and they repented not of their deeds. And the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the river therefore was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. By the way, quick tidbit, that's how Babylon was defeated. The great river Euphrates was dried up, so that the armies of Persia could enter into Babylon. And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For these are the spirits of devils that work miracles, which go forth to the kings of the earth and the whole world, and they gather them to battle the great day of God Almighty. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watches and keep his commandments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. And the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple from the throne, saying, It is done. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, so much as has been seen by men since they were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the city of the nations, and the cities of the nations fell, and the great Babylon came into remembrance before Jehovah, and to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent, and men blasphemed God because of the plagues of the hail, for the plague thereof was exceedingly great. It's tough reading Revelation, because this is like reading a cipher code. John the Apostle is said to be the revelator in this sense. And you've got to remember, when he was banished to the Isle of Patmos, right? Which is why it says, John, banished to the Isle of Patmos, servant or slave of Jesus Christ, banished to the Isle of Patmos. He's writing all this while he is banished to an island. Basically, they left him on a little island to die. He wrote this work, had his visions, and he has to everything he says, he has to encode in a way that the Roman authorities that are going to read it first are not going to say, this is sedition against Rome. Because if it's sedition against Rome, number one, it's never going to leave that island, and he's going to be executed. So he has to be able to say all these things in a way that it means something to the Hebrew person that is reading it. And you'll see, like right now, he's referring to the plagues. I don't know if that's if he's making reference to them in terms of what God is going to do, or if he is in fact talking about something that's coming. Now, there's a real good series called Antichrist for Dummies that's on YouTube. And it's even set up like a For Dummies book. And it is probably the most well-researched video that I've seen regarding Revelation. But the way it works out is that most of it has already taken place, and that some of it is a direct prophecy against the events Emperor Vespasian and his family line, because that is who destroyed the temple. So basically, it's sort of like the way, take for instance, Jehovah uses Assyria to destroy Israel. And then he prophesies, and Assyria is basically like, Assyria, I use you to destroy Israel. Now I'm going to destroy you for destroying Israel. It's like, well, why did you use them? The point is that he does that kind of thing where he's like, look, I'm going to use this particular empire to rain down fire on you. I'm going to take that's what he says. When he says, I'm feeding you to the beasts, that's the kingdoms. That's other kingdoms. Beasts are kingdoms. You can verify that in the book of Daniel. When Daniel's talking to the angel, and the angel's like, what are these things? And Daniel's like, you know what they are. I don't know what they are. And he's like, these are the kingdoms of men. That's what the beasts are. They're men's kingdoms. So he said, when I'm going to bring the sword, well, obviously, the sword and the beasts of the field. Famine. What was the plagues? The sword, the famine, and the beasts of the field. That's your reward for walking contrary to God. If you do, he'll bring armies to kill you. He'll sell you into slavery, and he'll starve you to death. If you disobey him, that's going to be the reward. So when you read the book of Revelation, please be careful not to build, a whole. I know exactly you can. I don't think you're going to be proven true if you do, but you could certainly build a very complex and strange series of events that's going to occur in a certain time period. Seriously. When Martin Luther was actually translating his translation of the Vulgate, he was not going to put Revelation in it because it didn't make any sense to him. He said, this is just gibberish. I don't even know what to make of this, so I'm not going to include it. But because he translated the New Testament first. Then he started working on the Old Testament. As he went through the Old Testament, he hit the book of Daniel, and he's like, oh, now things in Revelation make sense, because so much of it is what Daniel said. And if you use Daniel's explanations of what the images are and such, it's like you have to know the cipher for the code. If you don't know what the words mean, then they're not going to mean anything to you. Or you're going to construe them to mean something completely different. I mean, I'll give you, for instance, there's a use of the word scorpion in Revelation. Now, in the Near East, a scorpion is a man killer. In America, we got scorpions that bite you that hurt like fire, but you're not going to die. But in the Middle East, there's scorpions that kill you when they bite you. And so some would say a man that's full of a poison is a scorpion. So some cultures would call a false prophet a scorpion. But the Roman centurions carried a ballista, or what later was renamed a crossbow in the Middle Ages, but that was never its name in the Middle Ages. What we call nowadays a crossbow then was called a scorpius, or a scorpion, because it looked like a scorpion. Sort of the way we have tomahawk missiles that are not shaped like tomahawks, but we call them tomahawk missiles. And we have sidewinder missiles that are not shaped like snakes, but we gave them the name of a deadly snake, you know. They called what we call the crossbow, or the ballista, they called it a scorpius, because of the way it looked. And in Revelation, it refers to the scorpius being used on people. And you could say, well, it's because he's telling you the Romans are going to do certain things, because they're going to use their famous weapon, the scorpion, against you, because they were the culture that had that weapon. That was one of their big artillery pieces that other people didn't have. It's hard to make something like that if you got nothing but Stone Age tools and wood to work with. Now, I'm not saying they're Stone Age people, but I guess early Iron Age, I guess we say. But those are the sheepfold gleanings that we got here. Does anybody have any questions that may have been confusing, or any, or just anything they want to tell us about before we close this out? And again, anybody that's is still watching, check out the Temple of Leonatopolis in Egypt. That's something that nobody ever mentions. I never even heard rabbis talk about it. It's one of those things that just kind of went and got forgotten, because people didn't read it's only mentioned in the works of Philo, which is a Jewish historian. It was in Alexandria. And in the works of Josephus, he mentions it briefly too. But it's the kind of thing that just history forgot, and it just forgot, because the temple in Israel is the one that gets all the big press. But the temple in Leonatopolis was a functioning Aaronic priest led temple in Egypt, as prophesied by Isaiah, and even took place during a time that could be exactly the time that Isaiah was talking about. He said it'd be a time that was trouble for Egypt and for Israel, when people would be crying out for help from God. And I'm sure they were crying out for help under Antiochus and the Seleucid kings of Greece. Whenever I study the word, I try to get. I mean, I've always been a history buff. I've always been interested in history, but I try to consider how the historical line fits into at least the part of Scripture where we have a really good, clear historical line. Maybe in Moses' time things get a little confusing. Was Nefertiri the Shalom, thanks, Chris. Was she the stepmother of Moses. Was she the Egyptian princess who picked up Moses? Nefertiti was a woman who was Pharaoh at one time. And they dug her name off of it. Was it? Yeah, Nefertiti, right? Yeah. Well, somebody might need to check me on that, but I think it was Nefertiti. But she was the Egyptian woman who became Pharaoh. And they dug her face and her name off of every monument that it had been placed on during her reign. For some reason, she was so hated that they cut her name out of everything. And hey, if she was Moses' mama, might be a good reason for Egypt to, or at least the kings of Egypt, to hate her, because that's who would have had those things removed. Some people say it was Tutmosis the second, or Tutmosis the third, which was the contemporary to Moses. I mean, his name is Tutmosis, right? Who would have been the contemporary, who would have led an army to chase down the Israelites in the wilderness. It's hard to tell, because that's up to the archaeologists to sort all that out. And I'm sure they hadn't figured it out. They hadn't figured everything out. I mean, you can't get so accurate when your entire language is based on pictures. Some of which we understand, some we're still figuring out. I'm talking about the hieroglyphics. I'm sure somebody would tell me. I'm sure somebody that studied them say, yeah, we know exactly what it means. And I would say, I know people that speak English that don't know what they mean. Literally. I talk to people who, I have conversations with people, and I have to be careful to use words that I know that they would probably know. But certain things don't mean to people what they mean to you. I'll give you some for instances. Here's some trigger words in English when you're dealing with people, especially talking about religion. Grace. What is grace? Okay. Love. What is love? Heaven. What is heaven? When you try to have a conversation with people about faith, what is faith? We have these words that we just spout them out, and we say them, and to us, in our own hearts and our own personality, they have meaning. But if you try to apply your personal definition of a word and then have a conversation with somebody else who has their own personal definition of a word, the likelihood the two of you can walk hand in hand is almost zero, because people are not good at letting other people believe things that they want to believe. There's a tendency to say, wait a second, if you believe one thing and I believe a different thing, one of us got to be wrong. Well, yes, I agree. The problem is, the only way we can come to a consensus is to actually really study what the words mean, how they're used, how they were meant at the time that they were said. That's why I said, when we read Revelation, woo, that's some of the hardest stuff. I mean, I don't know what he's talking about. I mean, I watched that video series I mentioned, and guy running the video series, he lined up prophecy right out of Revelation with the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, and how it literally killed, it caused the death of one of the emperors of Rome. He was already retired. Excuse me. He was a retired emperor, but he was one of Vespasian's descendants. And he died in the same house his father died in, of a disease that was totally an internal disease. The kind of thing that if you're like, well, if God gave you a disease, that's the one he gave you that. I think he bled out through his butt, I think, is what killed him. The kind of thing where maybe that was emerods that the Philistines were afflicted with when they stole the Ark of the Covenant. I don't know. I can talk about it, though. Well, thank you, everybody, for being with me on this wonderful Shabbat day and studying this wonderful and amazing word. I apologize. I have not learned Hebrew yet. One day I will. One day I will be able to read this in the original text and share with you all the incredible insights that I don't even get to see because I'm stuck reading this thing in English. It's like I don't know what can I even compare it to. It's like having a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and I got like every 10th piece in its place where it's supposed to be. Or I'll tell you what. Let's do it the way the Jews say it. Jews say there's 4 levels of meaning in the script in the scriptures. Let's say I got every 4th piece of the puzzle in a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. I can kind of make out what's going on, but some spots I'm assuming what the meaning is because it's missing. I don't know. And that's what it's like. I'll tell y'all a story before I go. I went to an Orthodox, I think maybe it was a conservative, synagogue right down the road, about 45 minutes down the road from my house. And I went for Yom Teruah because my wife works with elderly people, and we had an elderly Jewish woman that was a part of the group my mother works with. Of course, everybody is old Southern Baptist, folks, and there's this one, Yankee Jew in the midst of them, and she's a widow, and her kids don't really have much to do with her, so she knew we were into Hebrew roots, and she asked if we would take her to the temple, which is what they call the synagogue, take her to temple for Yom Teruah, or Rosh Hashanah, as they say. And I said, well, yes, absolutely. I mean, you're a widow. Yeah, of course we're going to take you out and treat you well, because that's what God says do. We don't have a choice, right? We have to take care for widows and orphans. So we take her out, and we go, and I'm telling you, the liturgy in an synagogue, it was like going to an Episcopal church. If you've ever been to an Episcopal church, you have to stand up and read this, and then say this, and then pray this, and then sit down and say this, and then stand up and read this, and then sit down and say this, and then stand up and pray this, and then sit down and pray. I mean, it's methodical. I mean, definitely, it's definitely a very systematic liturgy. It's not. There ain't nobody just reading the word and saying, "Hey, let's talk about this." No, there's a pre-established format that you need to use. So we go through all that, and the whole time I'm thinking, my gosh, this reminds me of an Episcopal church or a Catholic church so much. And the rabbi is preparing for his next service, was going to be the next day, and he needs to line up the Torah readings that they're going to do, and they've got 2 big Torah scrolls. But unfortunately, most of the folks in that congregation are 60 plus, and there really wasn't anybody to help him get the Torah scroll ready, because you remember the Torah scroll is like 50-60 pounds. I mean, it's pretty big. And so he brought the Torah out, and we eased it on down to the table. He unrolled it, and he got me to help him get it ready, so he could find the places in it. And I'm looking at it, and I just feel like an ignorant fool. I mean, I did. I just looked at that, and I just felt like I didn't know nothing about nothing. I told him, I said, I felt like what it must have been like to be a slave in the South, Civil War era, and somebody brings out a book and opens it up in front of you, and you just look at it like it might as well be blank, because you don't know what's in it. And I just looked at the words, and I said, I feel like I'm illiterate. I mean, I felt like an illiterate person. It didn't matter that I could speak and read English. I felt like an illiterate. And he said, well, you need to learn it. He said he's right. Still hadn't yet, though. But I definitely encourage everybody to learn much about it as you can, because you do need to know. You need to know what the Scripture is written in, or, I mean, talk about seeing it. You see through a glass darkly if you do know Hebrew. You see through a pinhole darkly if you don't know it. I mean, anyways, that's a little story I wanted to share with y'all, because it I mean, I honestly had no idea that that was the way I was going to feel when a Torah scroll was unrolled in front of me. I figured I would be at awe, or I might be like, wow, that's so neat and amazing. I can't believe, I can't believe the privilege that this rabbi, who probably doesn't like me already, is giving me by even letting me be, help him do this that he's doing. And, all I could do, I just looked at it and I just felt like an ignorant, illiterate moron. I felt like a child, staring at something that was beyond my comprehension. I felt like somebody had laid the treasure of the world out in front of me, and I couldn't even see it. It was just invisible. I could see the box that it was in, but I couldn't see any of the treasure. I couldn't touch it, and I couldn't take any of it with me. It was rough. Yeah, I guess that's just the desire to be better. That's something that I've had to fight with in my life, is the desire to be a better man than I was. I've always been smart. I've always had plenty of intelligence. Unfortunately, I've had enough that it's let me be lazy and procrastinate. Like, I went to college and I can't tell you when I studied. I don't remember studying at all, because I hardly ever did. I always managed to get by without even having to study by the skin of my teeth. And then, or choosing classes that I knew I could get through without having to study. And unfortunately, now that I'm in the big class in life, I'm starting to see that can't wing this one. I didn't have the privilege of being raised Hebrew, so I didn't have the privilege to go into the shiva or to the school or the shul. So I didn't get to do that. That's Maggie for you. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for sharing this time with me and enjoying this study of the word of Yehovah, or Hashem if you prefer, which is the name. If anybody ever wondered why Jews keep saying Hashem all the time, it's because it means the name. Because they're not allowed by the rabbis do not allow them to say the word Yehovah out loud. They may not pronounce Yod He Vav He out loud. That's forbidden, and it's a tradition that's carried on since the Greek and Roman times, because the Greeks and Romans forbid them to say the name of God out loud. The Romans didn't want them saying the name of God, period. In fact, some famous rabbi was burned for it, and I can't remember what his name was. But anyways, have a good, wonderful, and restful Shabbat. And for all you folks out there around the globe, hey, keep pushing deeper in, and who knows, maybe one day they'll let us into Israel, and we'll be able to live in the land as we were meant to. But we got to change, though. We do. We got to change. He says you have to know the law better than the scribes and the Pharisees. Literally, you're going to have to know it better than people who spent their entire lives learning it and all of the oral law associated with it. You're going to have to know that much so you can communicate with these people, because they really are on a different level than you are. But we got to get the family back together. So, again, shalom.